The gunshot victim was bleeding out on the floor when armed soldiers burst through the emergency room doors at 3:47 a.m., weapons drawn, scanning the chaos with tactical precision. But they weren't there for the shooter. They were there for the quiet blonde nurse in blood-stained scrubs kneeling beside the dying patient, the one everyone thought was just another overworked staff member on the graveyard shift. The lead officer's rifle dropped to his side the moment he saw her face. "Oh, Jesus Christ," he breathed into his radio. "It's Commander Rourke. She's here. E-oh." If you want to see how this story unfolds, stay with me until the very end. And if you're watching from your city, wherever you are in the world, drop a comment and let me know where this story has reached. Hit that like button so I know you're here. Sarah Rourke had been scrubbing blood off linoleum floors for 3 hours when the first fight broke out in the waiting room. Thursday nights at Riverside General in Ashmont City always ran hot. Domestic disputes, car wrecks, overdoses stacked up like cargo containers at a failing port. The hospital itself was falling apart. Cracked tiles, flickering lights, a water stain on the ceiling that had been growing since Sarah started working nights 6 months ago. Nobody knew her real story. Nobody asked. She wore navy scrubs with pockets full of gauze and trauma shears. Her hair stayed pulled back in a simple ponytail. No jewelry except a faded watch with a cracked face. She moved through the emergency department like a shadow, competent, invisible, useful only when someone needed an extra pair of hands. The doctors barely looked at her. The younger nurses treated her like furniture, and hospital director Vincent Cross treated her like dirt. "Rourke!" His voice cut across the nurses' station like a whip crack. "You're 3 minutes late clocking in." Sarah didn't look up from the patient chart she was updating. "There was a pediatric code in Bay 4. I stayed to help." "I don't pay you to make decisions." Vincent stepped closer, his cologne mixing with the antiseptic smell that clung to everything in the ER. He was tall, mid-40s, with the kind of polished confidence that came from never being told no. "I pay you to follow orders and stay in your lane." One of the residents nearby, a kid fresh out of med school named Torres, shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Sarah kept writing. "Noted." Vincent leaned against the counter, blocking her view of the computer screen. "You know what I heard about you? You were military, some kind of medic overseas." He said it like it was an insult. "Couldn't hack it though, washed out, too much stress, right? That's why you're here pushing meds at 3 in the morning instead of doing something important." Sarah's pen stopped moving for half a second. Then she clicked it shut and met his eyes. "Is there something you need, Director Cross?" His smile was cruel. "Just making sure you understand your place." She walked away before he could see her hands shaking. The truth was buried in classified files Vincent would never access. Sarah Rourke hadn't washed out of anything. She'd spent 8 years as a combat rescue officer leading evacuation teams in some of the worst hellholes on the planet. She'd pulled soldiers out of burning vehicles under enemy fire. She'd performed field surgery in collapsed buildings while mortars shook the walls. She had medals locked in a storage unit she hadn't opened in 2 years. But she didn't talk about it. Talking didn't save lives. Around 4 in the morning, the ER quieted to a dull hum. Sarah was restocking a supply closet when she heard shouting near the intake desk. "I don't care what your policy says." The voice was raw, desperate. "He served this country for 12 years, and you're telling me you won't treat him because he doesn't have insurance?" Sarah stepped into the hallway. A man in his 50s stood at the desk, supporting another man who looked barely conscious. The second man wore an old army jacket with corporal stripes still visible on the faded fabric. His face was pale, sweating, lips turning blue. The intake nurse, a woman named Delgado, who'd worked at Riverside for 20 years, shook her head firmly. "Sir, I'm sorry, but without proof of coverage, we can only stabilize him. After that what? He dies in the parking lot?" Sarah moved closer. The veteran was struggling to breathe, one hand pressed against his ribs. She recognized the signs immediately. Pneumothorax, collapsed lung. Maybe from an old injury, maybe from something new. Either way, he had minutes, not hours. "Let me see him," Sarah said quietly. The friend turned, hope flashing across his face. "You're a doctor?" "Close enough." She guided the veteran toward an empty wheelchair, her hands moving with practiced efficiency, checking his pulse, his airways, the way his chest moved asymmetrically when he tried to inhale. When did this start? Hour ago. We were at the VA, but they said the wait was 6 hours, and he started turning gray, so I drove him here. You did the right thing. Sarah looked at Delgado. Get me a crash cart and call respiratory, now. Delgado hesitated. Vincent said we can't admit anyone without... He's dying. Move. Something in Sarah's voice made Delgado grab the phone. They got the veteran into a trauma bay just as Vincent appeared in the doorway, his face already flushed with anger. What the hell do you think you're doing? Sarah was inserting a needle between the man's ribs, releasing the pressure crushing his lung. The veteran gasped, color flooding back into his face. His friend stood in the corner, tears streaming down his cheeks. Saving a life, Sarah said without looking up. You can bill me for the supplies. Vincent's voice went cold. You just violated hospital policy. That patient has no insurance, no approval for treatment. He has a collapsed lung, and about 2 minutes before he coded. Sarah secured the chest tube, watching the veteran's breathing stabilize. I'm not letting someone die because of paperwork. You don't make that call. Now she looked at him. The other staff in the hallway had gone silent, watching. Vincent's face was red, his hands clenched into fists. Then write me up, Sarah said. But I'm not apologizing for doing my job. Vincent pointed toward the exit. Security, get her out of this hospital, now. The veteran's friend stepped forward. Wait, she just saved... I don't care. Vincent turned to the 2 security guards who'd appeared at the end of the hallway. Both looked uncomfortable. Escort Nurse Rourke off the premises. Effective immediately. She's done here. Sarah pulled off her gloves and dropped them in the biohazard bin. She didn't argue, didn't plead. She just nodded once to the veteran, whose eyes were clear now, grateful, alive, and walked toward the exit with security trailing behind her like pallbearers. Torres, the young resident, opened his mouth like he wanted to say something, but he didn't. Nobody did. Sarah made it halfway across the parking lot before she heard the tires. 3 black SUVs came screaming into the ambulance bay, their sirens cutting the night air like razors. They weren't ambulances, they were military vehicles, armored, reinforced, with government plates that made the security guards behind her stop walking. Soldiers poured out before the vehicles even finished stopping. Not regular army, special operations. Sarah recognized the patches, the weapons, the way they moved with controlled urgency that came from training. Most people would never survive. They were carrying bodies. No, not bodies, wounded. Federal agents, from the look of the gear. At least 8 of them, maybe more. Blood everywhere, gunshot wounds, shrapnel. One guy was missing half his arm. The ER doors burst open and staff spilled out, but they froze when they saw the scale of the carnage. Someone screamed. A nurse dropped her clipboard. Then one of the soldiers, a captain with a scar across his jaw, looked directly at Sarah and shouted across the parking lot. Commander Rourke, we need you now! The words hit like a flashbang. The security guards beside Sarah took a step back. Vincent appeared in the doorway, confusion and anger still written across his face. Staff members turned to stare. Sarah felt something old and familiar slot into place behind her ribs. She walked toward the soldiers, her pace quickening with each step. How many wounded? 9 confirmed, 4 critical. We were ambushed 15 miles outside the city, federal witness convoy. They knew our route. She reached the first SUV and looked inside. A federal marshal was unconscious, a tourniquet around his thigh already soaked through. Another agent beside him had a sucking chest wound, his breathing shallow and wet. Sarah's voice changed. It wasn't a nurse's voice anymore. It was the voice of someone who'd commanded men in places where hesitation meant death. Get them inside now. Critical cases to trauma 1 and 2. Torres! She pointed at the young resident still standing in shock near the door. Start 2 large-bore IVs on the chest wound. Delgado, I need O negative blood, 4 units, and get the trauma surgeon down here immediately. Nobody moved. Now! The word cracked like a gunshot. They moved. The ER transformed into controlled chaos. Sarah was everywhere at once, directing staff, prioritizing patients, her hands moving with speed and precision that made the seasoned nurses look clumsy. She intubated the marshal with the chest wound in under 30 seconds, started a transfusion on another agent while simultaneously directing Torres through a temporary airway procedure. Vincent tried to regain control. Everyone stop! I'm the director of this hospital and I didn't authorize... Then authorize it or get out of my way. Sarah didn't even look at him. She was busy inserting a chest tube into a federal agent whose lung was filling with blood. One of the soldiers, the captain who'd called her name, stepped beside Vincent. He didn't raise his weapon, didn't need to. His presence was enough. She's Commander Sarah Rourke, the captain said quietly. Special Operations Medical Command. She led combat rescue teams in 3 active war zones and has more field experience than every doctor in this building combined. So unless you want these federal agents to die in your lobby, I suggest you let her work. Vincent's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. The next 2 hours were a blur of blood and adrenaline. Sarah moved between patients with the kind of fluid efficiency that only came from doing this work under enemy fire. She saved the marshal with the chest wound, stabilized 2 agents who would have bled out in minutes, talked a panicking surgical resident through a procedure he'd only read about in textbooks. The staff watched her with something between awe and terror. Around dawn, when the last critical patient was finally stabilized, Sarah stepped into an empty hallway and leaned against the wall. Her scrubs were soaked with blood. Her hands were shaking again, but this time from exhaustion, not anger. The scarred captain found her there. Hell of a night, Commander. She didn't correct the title. Who were they transporting? Witness in a federal corruption case. Someone leaked the convoy route to a militia group. His expression darkened. We lost 3 agents in the ambush. Would have been a lot more if you hadn't been here. Sarah closed her eyes. 3 dead. The number sat heavy in her chest, familiar and awful. The witness? She asked. Secure, different vehicle. That's the only reason this wasn't a complete disaster. He paused. We've been looking for you, actually. Took some digging to find you working night shift in Ashmont under your real name. I wasn't hiding. No, just trying to disappear. His tone wasn't judgmental. I get it. But people remember what you did overseas, the Kandahar rescue, the embassy evacuation, and I know what I did, Sarah pushed off the wall. I also know why I left. The captain studied her face. The stolen medical supplies. $200,000 worth of trauma equipment meant for field hospitals. Diverted and sold on the black market while soldiers died because we didn't have enough morphine or tourniquets. Her voice was flat, reciting facts that still made her sick. I reported it. They buried it. Told me to keep my mouth shut or face a court-martial for insubordination. So you resigned. I couldn't stay in a system that let that happen. The captain nodded slowly. For what it's worth, the investigation eventually went forward. 3 officers got dishonorable discharges. It just took 2 years longer than it should have. Sarah felt something tight in her chest loosen slightly. 2 years. She'd been gone for 2 years working night shifts and scrubbing floors, thinking nothing had changed. Commander Rourke? A voice interrupted them. Sarah turned. It was Delgado, the intake nurse. Behind her stood Torres and 2 other nurses who'd worked through the chaos. They all looked exhausted. I just wanted to say, Delgado's voice cracked slightly. Thank you for what you did tonight. All of it. Torres stepped forward. You saved my ass in there. I froze on that airway procedure and you walked me through it like we weren't standing in the middle of a war zone. Sarah managed a tired smile. You did fine. No. Torres shook his head. You did fine. We were just trying not to screw up. Before anyone could say more, Vincent's voice echoed from the end of the hallway. I want everyone in the conference room, now. The staff exchanged glances. The captain's hand moved closer to his sidearm, a subtle shift that Vincent probably didn't notice but Sarah caught immediately. They filed into the conference room. Vincent stood at the head of the table, his tie still perfect despite the carnage that had flooded his ER hours earlier. Behind him stood 2 men in dark suits, federal agents, not the wounded ones. These were investigators. Vincent's expression was hard. I've been informed that this hospital is now part of a federal investigation regarding the convoy ambush. These agents will be conducting interviews with all staff who had contact with Director Cross. One of the investigators stepped forward. He was older, gray-haired, with the kind of weathered face that came from decades of seeing humanity at its worst. I'm Special Agent Brennan. Before we proceed, I need to clarify something. Vincent frowned. Clarify what? Brennan pulled out a tablet and set it on the conference table. 3 weeks ago, our office received an anonymous tip regarding irregularities in pharmaceutical inventory at Riverside General. Specifically, controlled substances being diverted from hospital supply chains. The room went very quiet. We've been monitoring shipment records, purchase orders, and distribution logs. Brennan swiped through screens on the tablet. What we found was a systematic operation to skim high-value medications, morphine, fentanyl, trauma supplies, and reroute them through third-party distributors. Sarah felt ice forming in her stomach. The same thing. The exact same thing that had driven her out of the military. Vincent's face had gone pale. That's absurd. This hospital maintains strict inventory protocols that you personally overrode on 17 separate occasions. Brennan looked up from the tablet. Every override came from your administrative log-in, and the third-party distributor receiving the diverted supplies, it's owned by your brother-in-law. Torres whispered something under his breath that might have been a curse. Brennan continued. The convoy ambush wasn't random. Our witness was scheduled to testify about this pharmaceutical theft ring, a network that spans 6 hospitals across 3 states. Someone leaked the transport route to make sure he never made it to trial. You think Vincent's voice climbed higher. This is insane. I run this hospital. We found the leak. Brennan tapped his tablet. It came from your office computer. 2 days ago. An encrypted email sent to an external server that we've now traced to the militia group responsible for the ambush. Vincent stepped backward, his shoulder hitting the wall. No, I never. Someone must have used my computer. I would never. Sarah watched him unravel, and somewhere deep in her chest, she felt a cold satisfaction. Not triumph, just the simple recognition that the universe occasionally tilted toward justice. Director Cross, Brennan said calmly, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, and federal drug trafficking. 2 more agents entered the room. Vincent looked around wildly, searching for support, but every face stared back at him with varying degrees of shock and disgust. This is a mistake, Vincent's voice cracked. I'm the director of this hospital. You can't just... He ran. It was pathetic, really. He made it maybe 6 steps before the agents tackled him into the hallway floor. His expensive shoes squeaked against the linoleum. Someone's coffee mug shattered. Vincent was still shouting about lawyers and mistakes, and how this was all a misunderstanding, but his voice had the hollow quality of a man who knew he was finished. They dragged him past the trauma bay where Sarah had saved the veteran's life 4 hours earlier, past the nurse's station where he'd humiliated her in front of the staff, past the exit where security had been escorting her out when the soldiers arrived. The veteran was still there, actually, sitting in a wheelchair near the waiting room, his friend beside him. He met Sarah's eyes as Vincent was hauled past in handcuffs, and he nodded once, a soldier's nod, the kind that didn't need words. Agent Brennan approached Sarah as the other staff began to disperse, whispering urgently to each other. Commander Rourke, can we speak privately? They moved into an empty office. Through the window, Sarah could see news vans pulling into the parking lot. Reporters were already setting up cameras. This was going to be a story. A big one. Brennan closed the door. How long have you been working at Riverside? 6 months? And you never reported suspicions about the pharmaceutical theft? Sarah's jaw tightened. I'm a night shift nurse. I don't have access to inventory logs or administrative records, but she hesitated. I noticed discrepancies. Trauma supplies running out faster than they should. Orders for medications that never arrived. I mentioned it to my supervisor twice. She told me I was mistaken. Your supervisor is also under investigation. Brennan pulled out a card and handed it to her. We're going to need a full statement. Everything you saw, everything you noticed. Can you do that? Sarah took the card. Yeah, I can do that. Brennan studied her for a long moment. The captain told me about your military service. What you did overseas. What happened with the supply theft that made you resign? I don't talk about that. I know, but I think you should know. The investigation you started before you left, it broke open a much bigger operation. Your testimony, even though it got buried initially, was the foundation that eventually brought down a network spanning 4 continents. You saved lives, Commander. More than you probably realize. Something hot pressed behind Sarah's eyes. She blinked it away. I just wanted to do the right thing. And you did. Tonight, too. Brennan moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing. The convoy witness, the man we were protecting, he's awake, asking to meet the commander who saved half his security detail. Sarah shook her head. I was just doing my job. That's what all the good ones say. Brennan smiled faintly. Take the win, Commander. You earned it. He left. Sarah stood alone in the office, watching dawn light spread across the parking lot. The news crews were multiplying. Patients and staff members were gathering near the windows, phones out, filming everything. Her watch said 6:47 a.m. Her shift had ended almost 2 hours ago. Torres knocked on the door frame. Hey, some of us are grabbing breakfast at the diner across the street. You should come. I'm not really... Please. Torres looked embarrassed. I need to apologize for not speaking up earlier. When Vincent was... He trailed off. You were right about everything. And I was a coward. Sarah felt her expression soften. You're a resident. Speaking up against a hospital director is a good way to destroy your career before it starts. I get it. That's not an excuse. No, Sarah agreed, but it's a reason, and you can do better next time. Torres nodded. The offer stands if you want company. After he left, Sarah sat in the office chair and finally let herself feel the weight of the night. The veteran she'd saved, the wounded soldiers she'd stabilized, Vincent being dragged away in handcuffs. The revelation that her old testimony had actually mattered, had actually led to something resembling justice. Her phone buzzed. A text from a number she didn't recognize. This is Captain Hayes. The scarred guy from earlier. Army's requesting your presence at a briefing tomorrow. 0900 hours at Federal Building downtown. Bring the uniform if you still have it. They want to honor your service properly this time. Sarah stared at the message for a long time. Then a second text arrived. You don't have to come if you don't want to, but I think you should. Some battles you don't win right away. Doesn't mean they weren't worth fighting. She thought about the storage unit she hadn't opened in 2 years. The medals she'd shoved into a cardboard box because looking at them hurt too much. The uniform that still probably fit, if she could bear to put it on again. Through the window, she saw Delgado and 2 other nurses she'd worked with emerging from the hospital, scanning the parking lot. Looking for her. Looking for... Maybe Torres was right. Maybe she should get breakfast. Maybe she should let herself exist in the same space as people who'd seen what she could do and didn't look away. Her phone buzzed again. Another text. This one from Agent Brennan. Just got confirmation. Vincent Cross wasn't acting alone. We've arrested 4 more hospital administrators and 6 pharmaceutical suppliers across the network. Your statement was key. Thank you for doing the right thing. Again. Sarah closed her eyes and let herself feel something she hadn't allowed in a very long time. Pride. Not the arrogant kind. The quiet kind that came from knowing you'd stood in the fire and refused to let it burn away the parts of yourself that mattered. She stood, pulled off the blood-stained scrubs, and found clean clothes in her locker. The nurses were still waiting in the parking lot when she emerged. Torres waved from the diner across the street. The news cameras swung toward her. Reporters started shouting questions. But Sarah just walked past them toward the people who'd stood in the chaos with her, who'd followed her commands when everything was falling apart, who'd looked at her afterward and seen someone worth knowing. The veteran was being wheeled out to a car. His friend saw Sarah and touched the old soldier's shoulder, pointing. The veteran raised one hand, a slow, deliberate salute that probably hurt his still-healing ribs. Sarah returned it, not as a nurse, not as someone trying to disappear. As Commander Sarah Rourke, who'd walked away from everything she'd built because she refused to be complicit in corruption, and who'd somehow found herself standing in almost the exact same fight 2 years later. Except this time, she wasn't walking away. She crossed the street toward the diner. The sun was fully up now, warm on her shoulders. Behind her, Riverside General stood like a monument to institutional rot finally exposed to daylight. Ahead, Torres held the door open and the smell of coffee and bacon drifted out into the morning air. Sarah's phone buzzed one more time. Captain Hayes again. See you tomorrow at 0900. Bring the uniform. That's an order, Commander. She smiled, small, private, real, and walked inside. The diner smelled like burnt coffee and decades of grease soaked into vinyl booth seats. Sarah slid into the corner table where Torres and 3 nurses had claimed space, their faces still carrying the stunned exhaustion of people who'd just watched their world flip inside out. Delgado pushed a menu across the table. "Order whatever you want. It's on me." "You don't have to—" "Yeah, I do." Delgado's voice was firm. "I should have backed you up with that veteran. Should have told Vincent to shove his policies when you were trying to save someone's life." Sarah picked up the menu without reading it. "You would have gotten fired." "So would everyone else who kept quiet." Torres stared at his coffee cup. "Doesn't make it right." The waitress appeared, an older woman with tired eyes and a name tag that said Maureen. She took their orders with the efficiency of someone who'd been doing this job since before any of them were born. Sarah asked for eggs and toast, knowing she probably wouldn't eat much but needing something to do with her hands. After Maureen left, one of the younger nurses, a woman named Kim who'd been working at Riverside for maybe 8 months, leaned forward. "Is it true what that captain said? About you leading rescue teams overseas?" Sarah's jaw tightened. "Yeah." "Why didn't you ever mention it?" "Because it doesn't matter." Sarah reached for the coffee pot and poured herself a cup, even though her hands were still shaking slightly. "I'm not that person anymore." "Bullshit." Delgado's voice cut sharp. "I watched you tonight. You were absolutely that person. You just stopped wearing the uniform." Torres cleared his throat. "What happened? I mean, why did you leave the military if you were that good at it?" Sarah took a long drink of bad coffee and wished she was anywhere else. But these people had earned an answer. They'd stood beside her when everything went sideways. They deserved the truth, or at least part of it. "There was a supply theft operation," she said finally. "Medical equipment meant for field hospitals got diverted and sold. Soldiers died because we didn't have enough morphine or tourniquets or basic trauma supplies. I reported it, got told to shut up and accept the chain of command." She set down her cup. "So I left." Kim's eyes went wide. "Jesus. And then you ended up here watching Vincent do the exact same thing." Delgado shook her head slowly. "That's some cosmic irony. Or cosmic justice." Torres glanced toward the window where news crews were still swarming Riverside's parking lot. "He's done. They all are. Because you didn't shut up this time either." The food arrived. Sarah forced herself to eat, mechanically forking eggs into her mouth while the conversation flowed around her. Hospital gossip, speculation about who else might get arrested, questions about what would happen to Riverside now that its entire administrative structure was implicated in federal crimes. Maureen refilled their coffee cups and said, "You're the nurse from the news, aren't you? The one who saved all those agents." Sarah looked up. "I'm just a nurse." "That's not what they're saying on TV." Maureen nodded toward a small television mounted in the corner. The volume was low, but the closed captions scrolled across the bottom of the screen. "Former Special Operations Commander stops federal witness assassination. Military hero working in secret as night shift nurse." Torres read the captions and whistled softly. "You're going to be famous." "I don't want to be famous." "Too late." Kim held up her phone. The screen showed Sarah's old military photo. Younger, wearing dress blues, medals on her chest. Someone had dug it out of archived service records. "This has like 3 million views already." Sarah felt her stomach turn. She pushed her plate away. "Hey." Delgado reached across the table and gripped her wrist. "You did good work. Let people see it." "I just want to go home and sleep for 16 hours. "Then do that." Torres stood and dropped cash on the table. "But tomorrow, when you go to that briefing, wear the uniform. Let them honor what you did. You earned it." Sarah didn't respond. She just watched Torres leave, followed by Kim and the other nurse. Delgado stayed. "You're scared," Delgado said quietly after the door closed. "I'm tired." "You're scared that if you put the uniform back on, you'll remember why you loved it. And you're scared that if you loved it, leaving was a mistake." Delgado finished her coffee. "But you didn't leave because you stopped believing in the work. You left because the system was broken. There's a difference." Sarah met her eyes. "What if I can't go back?" "Then you don't. But at least let them say thank you before you decide." Delgado stood, left money on the table, and walked out. Sarah sat alone in the booth for another 20 minutes, watching the news coverage through the window. Reporters interviewing shocked patients, federal agents carrying boxes of evidence from Riverside's administrative offices, a photo of Vincent being loaded into a police car, his face pale and destroyed. Her phone buzzed. Captain Hayes again. Media's already calling you the Ghost Commander. Catchy. See you at 0900. She paid her bill and walked out into sunlight that felt too bright after the long night. The news crew spotted her immediately. Cameras swung. Reporters surged forward with microphones extended like weapons. Commander Rourke, can you comment on, is it true you uncovered the pharmaceutical theft? How does it feel to be called a hero at... Sarah pushed through them without speaking and got into her car, a 15-year-old Honda with a cracked windshield and an engine that rattled. She drove home through morning traffic, every radio station talking about the convoy ambush and the hospital corruption scandal and the mysterious military nurse who'd been hiding in plain sight. Her apartment was small and mostly empty. A mattress on the floor, a folding table with 2 chairs. Boxes she'd never unpacked stacked against one wall. She'd been telling herself for 2 years that this was temporary, that she'd eventually find a real place and make it feel like home. She hadn't been lying. She just hadn't been telling the truth either. Sarah showered off the dried blood and climbed into bed, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the wounded agents bleeding out in the parking lot, the veteran struggling to breathe, Vincent's face when the federal agents arrested him, the way Torres had looked at her, like she was something bigger than a night shift nurse who kept her head down. Around noon, she gave up and drove to the storage unit on the industrial edge of Ashmont, where she'd shoved everything that reminded her of who she used to be. The unit was small, climate-controlled, and cost $60 a month she could barely afford. She unlocked the rolling door and stepped into air that smelled like cardboard and dust. Her dress uniform hung in a garment bag against the back wall. Beside it, boxes labeled medals, photos, records. She pulled down the garment bag and unzipped it slowly. The uniform looked exactly like she remembered. Navy blue with gold buttons, commander's insignia on the shoulders, ribbons arranged in precise rows across the chest, Bronze Star, Purple Heart, Meritorious Service Medal, and others she'd tried to forget about. Sarah touched the fabric and felt something crack open in her chest. She'd loved this. The structure, the purpose, the clarity of knowing exactly who she was and what she was supposed to do. She'd loved leading teams into impossible situations and bringing them home alive. She'd loved the weight of responsibility and the knowledge that her decisions mattered. And she'd lost it all because she couldn't watch corruption destroy people and stay silent. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Commander Rourke? The voice was female, professional, with the clipped tone of someone used to being obeyed. This is Colonel Patricia Valdez, Army Medical Command. I'm calling regarding tomorrow's briefing. Sarah's spine straightened automatically. Ma'am? I wanted to give you advance notice of what to expect. The ceremony will include a formal commendation for your actions last night. Additionally, the investigation into the pharmaceutical theft ring has revealed connections to the supply corruption you reported during your service. Your original testimony has been declassified and entered into evidence. The officers you accused are now facing court-martial. Sarah sat down hard on a cardboard box. They buried that investigation. They tried, but the evidence you provided was solid enough that it couldn't stay buried forever. Sometimes justice takes longer than we'd like. Valdez paused. I also wanted to extend a personal apology. You did the right thing, Commander. You should have been protected, not pushed out. I resigned voluntarily. Because you were given an impossible choice. That's not voluntary. That's coercion. Valdez's voice softened slightly. For what it's worth, I read your file. You were one of the best combat rescue officers we've ever trained. Losing you was a significant failure on our part. Sarah didn't know what to say to that. Valdez continued. Tomorrow's briefing will also include a proposal. I can't discuss details over the phone, but I think you'll be interested. 0900 hours, Federal Building downtown, 3rd floor conference room. Dress uniform requested, but not required. The call ended before Sarah could respond. She sat in the storage unit holding her dress uniform and wondered what the hell she'd gotten herself into. That evening, her apartment buzzer rang. Sarah checked the security camera. Captain Hayes stood in the hallway, still in uniform, looking uncomfortable. She opened the door. Captain. Commander. He held up a manila folder. Can I come in? Sarah stepped aside. Hayes entered and looked around at the bare apartment with an expression that said he understood exactly what kind of life this was. You want coffee? Sarah asked. I want to show you something. Hayes opened the folder and spread photos across her folding table. These are the agents you saved last night. All 9 survived. 4 required major surgery, but they're stable. The marshal with the chest wound, guy named Peterson, he's asking when he can meet you and shake your hand. Sarah looked at the photos. Men and women in hospital beds, bandaged and bruised, but alive. She felt something warm and painful behind her ribs. You also saved 3 soldiers in that convoy who would have bled out before we got them to the hospital. And the veteran from earlier in the night, his name is Marcus Reed, Army Corporal, served 2 tours in Iraq. His friend called the hospital today to get your contact information because he wants to buy you dinner. That's not necessary. Hayes pulled out another photo. This one showed a young woman, maybe early 20s, smiling at the camera. This is my daughter, Stephanie. She's a sophomore at State studying pre-med. She wants to be a combat medic like her dad. He set the photo down carefully. Last year, she was in a car accident. The paramedic who saved her life had been trained by you, in Kandahar, 7 years ago. Sarah stared at the photo. She'd trained hundreds of medics, thousands maybe. She couldn't remember all their faces. His name was Danny Liu. He said you taught him how to stay calm when everything's falling apart, how to prioritize when there's too many casualties and not enough hands, how to make the hard calls and live with them afterward. Hayes' voice roughened. He said you were the toughest instructor he ever had and the reason he didn't quit when the training got brutal. I don't remember him. Maybe not, but he remembers you. And because of that, my daughter is alive. Hayes gathered the photos back into the folder. I wanted you to know that before tomorrow. Whatever you decide about the Army's proposal, you've already done more good than most people manage in 10 lifetimes. After Hayes left, Sarah sat at her table and stared at the photo of his daughter. She thought about Danny Liu, who she probably yelled at during training, who'd taken those lessons and used them to save a stranger's life years later in a car accident thousands of miles from any battlefield. The ripple effect, the way one moment of competence could spread outward through time and space, touching lives you'd never know about. She'd forgotten that. Or maybe she'd stopped letting herself believe it mattered. Sarah slept 4 hours that night and woke at dawn feeling like she'd been hit by a truck. She made coffee, forced down toast, and stared at her dress uniform hanging on the bathroom door. The ceremony started at 0900. It was 0630. She put on the uniform slowly, her hands remembering the routine even though it had been 2 years. The pants fit a little loose. She'd lost weight working night shifts and eating vending machine food. The jacket still fit perfectly. She pinned the ribbons in their proper order, her fingers moving through muscle memory. The mirror showed someone she barely recognized. Commander Sarah Rourke in full dress blues, looking like she'd never left the service at all, except for the eyes. Those were different, older, tired in a way that had nothing to do with lack of sleep. Sarah drove to the federal building through morning traffic. The structure was modern glass and concrete, with security checkpoints and metal detectors. She showed her ID to 3 different guards before reaching the 3rd-floor conference room. The space was larger than she expected. At least 40 people already seated, military brass, federal agents, hospital staff. She recognized Torres and Delgado near the back. Agent Brennan by the window. Colonel Valdez at the head of the table wearing full Army dress uniform with enough medals to anchor a small ship. Captain Hayes stood when Sarah entered, and everyone else followed suit. "Commander on deck," someone said quietly. Sarah felt her face heat. This was exactly what she hadn't wanted. The attention, the ceremony, the weight of everyone's expectations pressing down on her shoulders. Valdez gestured to an empty seat near the front. "Commander Rourke, thank you for joining us." Sarah sat. The room settled. Valdez began without preamble. 2 nights ago, Commander Rourke prevented a catastrophic loss of federal personnel while simultaneously exposing a pharmaceutical theft operation that has now resulted in 14 arrests across 6 states. Her actions demonstrated exceptional medical skill, leadership under pressure, and moral courage in the face of institutional corruption. A projector flickered to life. Sarah's military record filled the screen. Deployments, commendations, efficiency reports that read like someone describing a different person entirely. Commander Rourke served 8 years in Special Operations Medical Command, Valdez continued. During that time, she led 43 successful evacuation missions, trained over 2,000 combat medics, and maintained a patient survival rate that exceeded operational standards by 17%. She left the service after reporting supply theft that was initially dismissed but has since resulted in 3 courts-martial and significant reforms to medical logistics protocols. Torres leaned forward, his eyes wide. Sarah could feel his stare burning into the side of her head. Valdez advanced the slides. What Commander Rourke did not know is that her testimony became the foundation of a much larger investigation. Her documentation of theft patterns, supplier irregularities, and chain of custody violations provided federal investigators with the roadmap they needed to dismantle an international trafficking network. The next slide showed a web of connections: hospitals, pharmaceutical companies, military installations, all linked by red lines indicating illegal supply diversion. 17 criminal organizations, 4 countries, estimated street value of diverted medical supplies exceeding $200 million. Valdez let that number hang in the air. And it started unraveling because one commander refused to accept corruption as standard operating procedure. Sarah felt sick. $200 million. How many soldiers had died because supplies went missing? How many civilians suffered because medications never reached hospitals? Agent Brennan stood. The pharmaceutical theft at Riverside General was a small part of this network, but Commander Rourke's actions there provided the final pieces we needed to secure indictments. Vincent Cross has agreed to cooperate in exchange for a reduced sentence. His testimony has already led to 4 additional arrests, including 2 state legislators and a hospital consortium CEO. The room erupted in quiet conversation. Sarah sat frozen, trying to process the scale of what they were describing. Valdez raised her hand for silence. Which brings us to today's primary agenda item. Commander Rourke, the Army would like to offer you reinstatement at your previous rank, along with a new assignment creating and leading a specialized medical oversight division focused on preventing exactly this kind of corruption. Sarah's head snapped up. What? You would have full investigative authority, a hand-picked team, and direct reporting lines to Army Medical Command and federal law enforcement. Your mandate would be identifying and eliminating supply theft, fraud, and corruption in military medical operations. Valdez smiled slightly. Essentially, we're asking you to be our conscience, with teeth. The room went silent. Sarah's mind was racing. This was everything she'd wanted 2 years ago. The authority to fix broken systems, the backing to hold people accountable, the chance to prevent the kind of corruption that got soldiers killed. But it was also everything that had destroyed her the first time. The politics, the resistance, the people with power who didn't want oversight or accountability. I need to think about it, Sarah said finally. Of course. We're not expecting an answer today. Valdez closed the folder in front of her. But before you decide, there's one more thing you should see. The conference room doors opened. A man in a wheelchair rolled in, pushed by a woman in her 30s. Sarah recognized them immediately. Marcus Reed, the veteran she'd saved 2 nights ago, and his friend who'd brought him to Riverside. Reed looked better. Still pale, still moving carefully, but alive and breathing without that terrible blue tinge to his lips. He met Sarah's eyes and gave that same slow, deliberate salute. Sarah stood and returned it. Commander Rourke, Reed's voice was rough but steady. I wanted to thank you personally. The VA told me I had a spontaneous pneumothorax from old shrapnel damage. Said I was maybe 10 minutes from cardiac arrest when you put in that chest tube. You're welcome, but anyone with trauma training could have... No. Reed shook his head. Anyone with training could have done the procedure, but you're the one who fought to treat me when that hospital director said I wasn't worth saving because I didn't have insurance. His hands tightened on the wheelchair arms. You fought for me. That's different. The woman beside him spoke up. I'm his sister, Jennifer. Marcus told me what happened, how you stood up to that administrator, how you got fired for doing the right thing. Her voice cracked slightly. Our family owes you everything. Sarah felt her throat closing. I was just doing my job. That's what heroes always say. Jennifer reached out and squeezed Sarah's hand. Thank you for bringing my brother home. After they left, Valdez gave Sarah a folder containing the formal reinstatement offer, salary details, and organizational charts for the proposed oversight division. Take your time reviewing this, but I hope you'll consider it seriously. We need people like you, Commander. People who won't look the other way. The ceremony broke up into smaller conversations. Torres approached, looking shell-shocked. $200 million, he said quietly. Jesus, and you just walked into the middle of it by accident. Not accident. I took a job at a struggling hospital because nobody asked questions and the pay doesn't require references. Sarah tucked the folder under her arm. I was trying to disappear. How'd that work out? Despite everything, Sarah almost smiled. Not great. Delgado joined them, along with 2 other nurses from Riverside. So are you taking the job? I don't know. What's to know? They're offering you a chance to fix the system that broke you the first time. Or break me again. Sarah looked around the conference room at all the brass and bureaucracy. I left because I couldn't change things from inside. What makes this different? Because now they're asking you to be the change instead of fighting against it. Torres pulled out his phone and showed her a news article. You know what's happening at Riverside? The entire staff is circulating a petition demanding you be appointed interim director while they search for Cross's replacement. 300 signatures already. Sarah felt dizzy. That's insane. That's respect. Delgado's voice was firm. You spent 6 months being invisible, and then one night showed everyone what real leadership looks like. Of course, they want you in charge. Agent Brennan appeared at Sarah's elbow. Commander, there's someone who'd like to speak with you. Private conversation. He led her to a smaller office down the hall. Inside sat a man in his 60s, silver-haired, wearing an expensive suit that screamed federal prosecutor. Commander Rourke, I'm Assistant U.S. Attorney Gerald Hoffman. I'm heading the prosecution of the pharmaceutical theft network. Sarah shook his hand and sat. What can I do for you? Hoffman opened a briefcase and pulled out a thick document. Vincent Cross is cooperating, but his testimony alone isn't enough to convict the larger players in this organization. We need someone who understands medical logistics, who can explain supply chain irregularities to a jury, who has credibility both in military and civilian healthcare. Sarah saw where this was going. You want me to testify? In multiple trials, potentially. Your original military testimony established the pattern. Your actions at Riverside provided the final evidence we needed. Together, it builds a narrative that juries can understand, systematic theft from the people who need it most. Hoffman leaned forward. I won't lie to you, Commander. This will be difficult. Defense attorneys will attack your credibility, your service record, your decision to resign. They'll paint you as someone with a grudge against authority. Because I do have a grudge against authority that protects criminals. Hoffman smiled slightly. Then you'll do just fine on the stand. Will you help us? Sarah looked at the document. Subpoenas, trial dates, witness preparation schedules. This wasn't just a few days of testimony. This was months, maybe years of her life consumed by legal battles. But it was also the chance to make sure the people responsible faced consequences. Real consequences, not just buried investigations and quiet resignations. Yeah, Sarah said finally. I'll do it. After Hoffman left, Sarah sat alone in the office and tried to process everything that had happened in the last 48 hours. She'd gone from invisible night shift nurse to the center of a massive federal investigation. From someone trying to disappear to someone everyone wanted on their team. It was terrifying. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number again. She answered cautiously. Commander Rourke, this is Lieutenant General Barbara Morrison, Army Medical Command. The voice was steel wrapped in silk. I understand Colonel Valdez made you an offer this morning. Yes, ma'am. I want to be very clear about something. If you accept this position, you will have full authority and my complete backing, but you will also have enemies. Powerful people who profit from the corruption you'll be investigating. They will come after you with everything they have. Sarah's grip tightened on the phone. I understand. Do you? Because this isn't like reporting supply theft and watching it get buried. This is committing to fight that battle every single day for as long as you wear the uniform. It's choosing to be the person everyone blames when comfortable arrangements get disrupted. Morrison paused. It's lonely, it's brutal, and it will cost you things you don't even know you value yet. Why are you telling me this? Because I want you to go into this with open eyes. You're not just accepting a job, Commander. You're accepting a mission that might not end until you're broken or dead. Morrison's voice softened fractionally. But if you're willing to carry that weight, you'll save more lives than you can count. You'll change a system that desperately needs changing, and you'll do it with the full force of the United States Army behind you. The line went silent for a moment. So, Morrison said quietly, are you willing? Sarah thought about Marcus Reed gasping for breath in the Riverside waiting room, the wounded federal agents bleeding out in the parking lot, the soldiers who died overseas because medical supplies got diverted and sold. Danny Liu saving Captain Hayes' daughter with training Sarah had given him years ago. The ripple effect. "Yes, ma'am," Sarah said. "I'm willing." "Good. Welcome back, Commander. Don't make me regret this." The call ended. Sarah walked back to the conference room where small clusters of people still lingered. Torres saw her first, and something in her expression made him straighten. "You took it," he said, not a question. "I took it." Delgado whooped and hugged her hard enough to knock the air from her lungs. Other nurses crowded around, congratulating her, asking questions she couldn't answer yet because she barely understood the details herself. Colonel Valdez appeared through the crowd. "Commander, I need you to come with me. There's a situation developing." The room went quiet immediately. Sarah followed Valdez into the hallway where Captain Hayes waited, his face grim. "What's wrong?" Sarah asked. Hayes handed her a tablet. The screen showed security footage from Riverside General, current, live feed. The timestamp read 15 minutes ago. Armed men in tactical gear were moving through the hospital corridors. "They're not police," Valdez said quietly, "and they're not military." Sarah watched the footage. The men moved with professional precision, clearing rooms, checking patient wards, searching for something. Or someone. "The pharmaceutical network knows you're the linchpin in the federal case," Hayes said. "Vincent Cross's cooperation doesn't mean anything if you're not alive to testify." The screen showed the armed men reaching the third floor, the trauma ward where Sarah had worked for 6 months, the nurses' station where she'd been humiliated, the supply closet where she'd hidden sometimes when the weight of everything got too heavy. One of the men held up a photo, Sarah's face. Valdez's phone rang. She answered, listened, and went pale. "They just hit your apartment, tore the place apart. Your car is still in the federal building garage, but they've got surveillance on all the exits." Sarah's stomach dropped. "They're not trying to kill me. They're trying to make me disappear. Probably to somewhere we can't extradite from." Hayes was already moving toward the elevator. "We need to get you into protective custody immediately." They rushed down to the parking garage. Federal agents materialized around them. 4 cars. Armed escort, bulletproof vests appearing from nowhere. Sarah was ushered into an unmarked sedan. Valdez climbed in beside her. Hayes took the front passenger seat, his weapon drawn. The convoy pulled out of the garage at speed. Sarah watched through the tinted windows as Ashmont City blurred past. The life she'd built here, fragile and half-formed as it was, had just evaporated. The apartment she'd never unpacked, the hospital where she'd tried to be invisible, the storage unit containing everything that used to define her, all of it gone in the space of one phone call. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Safe house outside the city." Valdez was typing rapidly on her phone. "We'll keep you there until the arraignments are finished and the immediate threat is neutralized." Sarah looked at her dress uniform. Medals and ribbons she'd earned in places most people couldn't find on a map. She'd put this on thinking she was attending a ceremony. Instead, she'd walked into a trap that was still closing around her. The convoy turned onto the highway heading north. Behind them, 2 more vehicles pulled into traffic. Following. Hayes saw them in the side mirror and swore viciously. "We've got company. 2 SUVs, black, no plates." The driver accelerated. The federal agents in the follow cars moved to intercept. Sarah felt her training kick in, assessing exits, calculating response times, running through scenarios. This wasn't a medical emergency. This was combat, and she was the objective. The trailing SUVs sped up, trying to box them in. Hayes was on his radio calling for backup, but Sarah knew how this worked. Backup would take 10 minutes minimum. A lot could happen in 10 minutes. She looked at Valdez. "If they take me, the case falls apart." "They're not taking you." Gunfire erupted behind them. The rear follow car swerved, its windshield shattering. The federal agents inside returned fire, but the black SUVs weren't backing off. The driver took an exit ramp at 70 miles per hour, tires screaming. They merged onto a secondary road, trees closing in on both sides. Less traffic here. Fewer witnesses. Worse odds. One of the black SUVs pulled alongside them. The window rolled down and Sarah saw the barrel of an assault rifle. Time slowed. She'd faced enemy fire before. She'd performed surgery while mortars shook the walls. She'd made impossible decisions about who lived and who died when there weren't enough resources to save everyone. But this was different. This wasn't a battlefield where the rules were clear. This was someone trying to erase her because she'd told the truth. The rifle fired. Their driver jerked the wheel and the sedan fishtailed, clipping a guardrail. Metal screamed. The windshield cracked but held. Hayes returned fire through the window, his shots punching holes in the SUV's door. It dropped back, but the second vehicle was closing fast. Sarah's mind raced through options. They were outnumbered and outgunned. The safe house was still 20 miles away. Backup was coming, but not fast enough. She grabbed Hayes' shoulder. "There's a VA hospital 3 miles from here. Take the next exit." "That's not protocol, T." "It's also not where they'll expect us to go. And it's federal property with armed security." Sarah's voice carried the tone that had made soldiers follow her orders without question. "Do it." The driver looked at Valdez, who nodded sharply. They took the exit. The black SUVs followed, but they'd lost some ground. The VA hospital appeared ahead, a sprawling complex with multiple buildings and confused signage that made approaching difficult if you didn't know the layout. Sarah knew the layout. She'd volunteered in the ER here for 3 months before taking the job at Riverside. Main entrance straight through the sliding doors. The security office is immediately to the right, and they've got ex-military police on duty. She pointed. "Go!" The sedan screamed into the ambulance bay. Federal agents poured out, weapons raised. Sarah and Valdez ran for the entrance with Hayes providing cover. Behind them, the black SUVs screeched to a halt, but they didn't pursue into the hospital. They couldn't. Too many witnesses. Too much exposure. They disappeared back into traffic. Inside the VA hospital, security officers swarmed them. Hayes flashed his credentials, and within minutes, the entire facility was on lockdown. Federal backup arrived 8 minutes later, flooding the area with enough firepower to invade a small country. Sarah stood in a borrowed office, still wearing her dress uniform, and felt her hands start shaking. Valdez touched her shoulder. "You did good. They almost killed us. But they didn't. You made the right call." Valdez looked exhausted. "The threat is real, Commander. These people have unlimited resources and no conscience. Staying in protective custody isn't optional anymore." Sarah nodded numbly. She understood the reality. She'd just become a target valuable enough to justify an armed ambush in broad daylight. Her phone buzzed. Torres. She answered. "Sarah, thank God. It's all over the news. Shooting on Highway 40, federal convoy attacked. They're saying you were in one of the cars." "I'm fine." "You don't sound fine." "I'm alive." "That's close enough." Sarah closed her eyes. "Torres, I need you to do something for me." "Anything. My storage unit code is 4739. Inside there's a box labeled letters. I need you to take them to my sister's address. It's written on the box. Can you do that?" Torres was quiet for a moment. "Sarah, you sound like you're saying goodbye." "I'm saying thank you. For being decent when it mattered. For speaking up after staying quiet." "Where are you going?" Sarah looked at Valdez, who was already organizing the next phase of extraction. Safe house. Witness protection protocols. A life that existed only in the margins, defined by security measures and constant threat assessment. "Somewhere safe," she lied. "I'll reach out when I can." She ended the call before Torres could ask more questions. Outside the window, federal agents were establishing a perimeter. News helicopters circled overhead. The VA hospital had become a fortress, and Sarah was somewhere in the center of it, trying not to think about how her life had shattered into pieces too small to gather back together. Colonel Valdez's phone rang. She answered, listened, and her face went gray. "What?" Sarah asked. Valdez set down the phone carefully, like it might explode. "That was Army intelligence. They ran facial recognition on the men from the SUVs." She met Sarah's eyes. 2 of them were former special forces, dishonorably discharged 3 years ago for conduct violations. The third was flagged as a person of interest in 4 unsolved murders connected to witness intimidation. Sarah felt cold spreading through her chest. Professional killers, hired by someone with serious money and motivation to keep you from testifying. Valdez sat down heavily. "Commander, this isn't just about the pharmaceutical theft anymore. Someone very powerful wants you dead." The words hung in the air like smoke after gunfire. Sarah looked at the phone in Valdez's hand and felt the last fragments of normalcy slip away completely. Who are they protecting? Sarah's voice came out flat, almost detached. Vincent Cross doesn't have that kind of money. Hospital administrators don't hire special forces assassins. Valdez stood and moved to the window, checking the perimeter with the practiced eye of someone who'd survived too many ambushes. Cross was middle management. Someone higher up the chain is afraid you'll connect dots they've spent millions keeping separate. Captain Hayes pushed into the office, his phone pressed to his ear. He looked like he'd aged 5 years in the last hour. Army intelligence just intercepted encrypted communications. There's a second team en route to the VA hospital. ETA 12 minutes. Impossible. Valdez's hand went to her sidearm. We've got federal agents on every exit. Air support overhead. They're not coming through the exits. Hayes pulled up a schematic on his tablet. The VA shares utility tunnels with the adjacent medical research facility. Built in the 70s, mostly forgotten. Only maintenance crews use them now. He zoomed in on a section of underground passages. Someone gave them blueprints. Sarah felt ice forming in her stomach. Inside help. Has to be. These tunnels aren't on public records. Hayes looked at Valdez. We need to move her now. Every minute we stay here, they're getting closer. Valdez was already calling for extraction. Sarah heard her rattling off coordinates, demanding helicopter support, authorization for emergency protocols. But Sarah's mind was elsewhere, running calculations that had nothing to do with escape routes, professional killers with inside information, someone powerful enough to corrupt federal investigations, access to classified infrastructure. This wasn't just about pharmaceutical theft anymore. This was about protecting something much bigger, something that required eliminating witnesses before they could see the full picture. We're not running, Sarah said quietly. Hayes and Valdez both turned to stare at her. Commander, with respect, running is exactly what we're doing. Valdez pocketed her phone. Helicopter extraction in 8 minutes. We get you to a secure military installation and they follow, because whoever's behind this has enough reach to track federal convoys and access classified tunnel systems. Sarah's voice was steady now, the shakiness gone. Running just delays the problem. We need to make them show themselves. That's insane, Hayes shook his head. You want to use yourself as bait? I want to stop looking over my shoulder for the rest of my life. Sarah met his eyes. You said there's a second team coming through the tunnels. How many? Hayes hesitated, then checked his tablet. Intelligence estimates 4 to 6 operators. Former military, highly trained. Then we have numbers advantage. This building has what, 30 federal agents? Plus VA security, plus whatever backups arriving. Sarah moved to the schematic, studying the tunnel layout. We know where they're coming from. We know their objective is me. We control the terrain. Valdez was staring at her like she'd lost her mind. You're talking about turning a VA hospital into a kill zone. I'm talking about ending this before it spreads. Before they go after Torres or Delgado or anyone else who saw what happened at Riverside. Sarah's finger traced the tunnel routes. These passages converge here, in the sub-basement near the old boiler room. Single access point to the main hospital. We fortify that position, evacuate patients from nearby wards, and when they come through, we arrest them. Valdez finished the thought, her expression shifting from shock to calculation. Force them into a confined space where they can't run, and we control every angle. Hayes was pulling up radio frequencies. This is against every protection protocol in the book. The book got 3 federal agents killed and almost got us shot off Highway 40. Sarah looked between them. I'm tired of playing defense. Are you with me or not? Valdez and Hayes exchanged a long look. Some silent communication passed between them, the kind that came from years of working in situations where hesitation meant death. I'm calling this in, Valdez said finally. Lieutenant General Morrison will have my head on a platter, but she'll back the play. She was already dialing. Hayes, coordinate with federal agents. I want a perimeter around that sub-basement tighter than a drum. No one gets through except our people. The next 7 minutes were controlled chaos. Federal agents poured into the VA hospital's lower levels, setting up firing positions and barricades. VA security evacuated patients from 3 nearby wards, moving them to upper floors with practiced efficiency. Army intelligence patched into the hospital's security cameras, giving them real-time surveillance on every corridor leading to the sub-basement. Sarah stood in what used to be a maintenance office, now converted into a makeshift command center. Screens showed multiple angles of the tunnel system. Empty now, but not for long. An army sergeant approached with body armor. "Commander, regulations require—" "I know the regulations." Sarah took the vest and strapped it on over her dress uniform. The weight felt familiar, grounding. "What's the response time if this goes sideways?" 3 minutes for additional tactical units, 90 seconds for air support. The sergeant handed her a radio. "But ma'am, you should be in the secured area upstairs with the evacuated patients." "I'm exactly where I need to be, Sergeant." He looked like he wanted to argue, but didn't. Instead, he saluted and moved to his position. Hayes appeared at her elbow, similarly armored. "Morrison approved the operation. Also said to tell you that if you get killed, she's personally digging you up to court-martial you." Despite everything, Sarah almost smiled. "Noted. Contact." An agent's voice crackled over the radio. "Thermal imaging shows 4 individuals entering the tunnel system from the research facility side, moving toward the hospital." Everyone went still. On the screen, Sarah could see nothing yet, just empty concrete passages lit by flickering fluorescent tubes. But somewhere in that maze, professional killers were closing in. Valdez moved beside Sarah, her weapon drawn. "Last chance to reconsider this plan." "I stopped reconsidering 2 years ago when I walked away from the military." Sarah checked her radio one more time. That didn't work out great either. The thermal imaging updated. 4 red silhouettes moving through the tunnels with tactical precision, clearing corners, checking sight lines. They moved like soldiers, which made sense because that's what they used to be before dishonor and money turned them into something else. "They're carrying heavy weapons," an intelligence officer reported. "Automatic rifles, possible explosives. These guys came prepared for a fight." Sarah watched the figures advance. They were 3 minutes from the sub-basement access point, 2 minutes from the kill zone where 30 federal agents waited in concealed positions. Her hands weren't shaking anymore. The fear had burned away, leaving something colder and harder behind. She'd made life-or-death decisions in burning buildings while mortars rained down. She'd chosen who lived and who died when there weren't enough supplies to save everyone. This was just another version of the same calculation. Except this time, she was the asset being protected, the variable that determined whether the equation balanced or collapsed. 90 seconds, Hayes murmured. The figures on the thermal display reached a junction point. One of them signaled the others to hold position. They were checking something, probably communications with whoever was feeding them information. Sarah's radio crackled. "All units, weapons tight, until my command. Let them enter the engagement area fully before we lock it down." 60 seconds. The figures started moving again, faster now. They knew time was against them. They'd expected to find Sarah alone or lightly guarded, not fortified in a prepared position with overwhelming force. But they were committed now. Professionals didn't abort once they were this deep into enemy territory. They pushed through, trusting training and firepower to carry them through. 30 seconds. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. The screen showed the killers reaching the final corridor before the sub-basement. 20 feet. 15. "Contact!" someone shouted over the radio. The sub-basement erupted. Federal agents appeared from concealed positions, weapons raised, spotlights flooding the corridor with blinding white light. The 4 figures froze, caught in the open with nowhere to go. "Federal agents! Drop your weapons! Get on the ground now!" For one frozen moment, Sarah thought they might actually comply. That this would end cleanly, with arrests and interrogations and answers about who'd sent them. Then one of them raised his rifle. Gunfire tore through the confined space. The sound was deafening even through the radio feed, a sustained roar of automatic weapons overlapping with shouted commands and screams. On the screens, muzzle flashes turned the corridor into a strobe-lit nightmare. Sarah couldn't look away. She'd seen combat, had worked through firefights while performing surgery. But this was different. This violence existed because of her, because she'd told the truth and refused to stay quiet. The exchange lasted maybe 10 seconds, but felt like hours. When it ended, 3 of the 4 attackers were down, bleeding out on concrete. The 4th had his hands raised, his rifle clattering to the floor. "Secure!" Hayes shouted into his radio. 3 suspects down, 1 in custody, medical teams forward. Sarah was moving before she consciously decided to. down the stairs through corridors that smelled like gunpowder and blood, into the sub-basement where federal agents were securing the scene. The surviving attacker was on his knees, hands zip-tied behind his back. His face was young, maybe 30, with the hard edges that came from seeing too much violence too early. Blood ran from a graze wound on his shoulder, but he wasn't making a sound. Sarah knelt beside one of the fallen men. His chest was torn apart by multiple rounds, his eyes already vacant. Dead before he hit the ground. The second was in worse shape, gut shot, still breathing but not for long. The third had taken rounds to the head and neck, no chance at all. She'd seen this before. Had treated similar wounds in field hospitals while mortar fire shook the walls. But those had been soldiers fighting for something they believed in, however misguided. These men had died for money, sent by someone wealthy enough to treat human lives like chess pieces. "Commander," Valdez appeared beside her. "We need you upstairs. Morrison wants a full debrief, and the U.S. attorney is already en route." Sarah stood slowly, her dress uniform now smeared with concrete dust and other people's blood. "What about him?" She nodded toward the surviving attacker. "Federal custody. He'll be processed and interrogated." Valdez lowered her voice. "Intelligence is already pulling his phone records, financial transactions, known associates. We'll find out who hired them." The prisoner's head lifted slightly. He looked directly at Sarah with an expression that might have been respect or hatred or some combination of both. "You made a mistake," he said quietly. His voice had a slight southern accent. "Walking into this trap." Sarah met his eyes. "Your team's dead and you're in federal custody. I'm still standing. Who made the mistake? You think this ends here?" He smiled, showing blood-stained teeth. "They'll keep coming. There's too much money involved, too many people who can't afford to let you talk." "Then they'll keep failing." Sarah turned away. "Because I'm not stopping." Upstairs, the command center had transformed into an investigation hub. Federal agents swarmed over laptops and tablets, tracking data trails and financial records. Army intelligence was running facial recognition on the dead attackers, pulling up service records and known connections. Assistant U.S. Attorney Hoffman burst through the door, his expensive suit rumpled and his tie askew. "Please tell me we have at least one alive." "In custody downstairs," Valdez confirmed. "Not talking yet, but he will." "He already told us what matters." Sarah pulled off the body armor and dropped it on a desk. "Someone with serious resources is afraid of what I know. We need to figure out what that is." Hoffman pulled out a folder thick with documents. "Vincent Cross's cooperation has given us names: 12 hospital administrators, 6 pharmaceutical executives, 2 state legislators. But they're all middle tier. The real power is higher up, insulated by enough legal barriers that we haven't been able to pierce the corporate veil. Until now." Colonel Valdez pointed to a screen where an intelligence officer was pulling up financial records. "The attack on Commander Rourke was a tactical error. It exposed coordination and resources that can be traced." The intelligence officer spoke up. "We're tracking the money used to hire these killers. It went through 4 shell companies and 2 offshore accounts. But the original transfer came from a private equity firm called Meridian Holdings." Sarah felt something click into place. "What does Meridian Holdings invest in?" "Healthcare infrastructure primarily. They own controlling stakes in 17 hospital systems across 11 states, including the consortium that Riverside General was part of." The officer pulled up more data. "They also own pharmaceutical distribution networks, medical supply companies, and logistics firms that handle transportation of controlled substances. Vertically integrated." Hoffman was scribbling notes. "They control every step of the supply chain from manufacturer to hospital bedside. Perfect setup for systematic theft because they're literally investigating themselves." Sarah moved closer to the screen. "Who owns Meridian Holdings?" The intelligence officer pulled up corporate filings. "The majority shareholder is listed as a trust, but the beneficial owner is—" He went pale. "Oh, hell." "What?" Valdez demanded. "Senator Richard Callaway. He's on the Senate Appropriations Committee, oversees federal healthcare funding." The room went dead silent. A United States senator. Not just wealthy and connected, but someone with direct legislative power over the very agencies investigating him. Someone who could bury inquiries, redirect resources, and protect his empire with the full weight of political influence. Hoffman sat down hard. "We can't touch him, not without ironclad evidence that survives judicial scrutiny. His lawyers will tie us up in court for years." Then we get ironclad evidence. Sarah's voice was steel. Vincent Cross testified about the hospital-level theft. The assassins lead back to Meridian Holdings. If we can connect Calloway directly to either the theft operation or the murder for hire, we have him. Hayes was shaking his head. You're talking about taking down a sitting senator. That's not a fight we can win. It's the only fight that matters. Sarah pulled up Calloway's photo on the screen. He looked distinguished, silver hair, strong jaw, the kind of face that inspired confidence in voters. How many people died because medical supplies got diverted into his profit margins? How many soldiers overseas? How many hospital patients? How many addicts who bought stolen pharmaceuticals on the street? We're not just talking about theft. We're talking about industrial-scale killing. Valdez's phone rang. She answered, listened, and her expression went grim. Army intelligence just intercepted a phone call. Senator Calloway's office contacted the Justice Department 20 minutes ago, requesting that all investigations related to the pharmaceutical theft be suspended pending congressional review. He's trying to shut us down, Hoffman said, using political pressure to kill the investigation before we connect him to the evidence. Sarah felt rage building behind her ribs, cold and focused. She'd spent 2 years trying to disappear because fighting corruption had destroyed her the first time. She'd taken a night shift job and kept her head down and convinced herself that staying invisible was the same as staying safe. But there was no safety. There was only choosing which battles mattered enough to risk everything. Do we have enough to arrest him? She asked Hoffman. Not yet. We have financial connections and hired killers that lead to his company. But defense attorneys will argue he had no knowledge of illegal operations. We need direct evidence, communications, orders, something that proves he knew about the theft and the murders. The prisoner downstairs. Hayes stood suddenly. He'll have communications with whoever hired him. If we can trace that back to Calloway personally, already working on it. The intelligence officer was typing frantically. His phone was encrypted, but we've got NSA resources cracking it now, should have access within the hour. Valdez grabbed Sarah's arm. Commander, you need to understand what you're walking into. Taking down a senator isn't like exposing hospital corruption. He'll have the best lawyers money can buy. He'll use media connections to destroy your credibility. He'll dig up every mistake you ever made and use it to paint you as unstable, vindictive, someone with a grudge against authority. Let him. Sarah pulled her arm free. I've been called worse by better people, and I'm still here. The next 40 minutes crawled past. Intelligence officers worked through the encrypted phone while federal agents compiled evidence linking Meridian Holdings to the pharmaceutical theft network. Hoffman drafted subpoenas and arrest warrants, building the legal framework to survive inevitable challenges. Sarah stood at the window watching the sun set over Ashmont City. Somewhere out there, a United States senator was making phone calls and pulling strings, using power accumulated over decades to protect an empire built on stolen medicine and dead patients. And somewhere in this building, the evidence that would destroy him was being assembled one piece at a time. Got it! The intelligence officer's shout brought everyone running. Encrypted messages between the prisoner and a number registered to a phone purchased by Meridian Holdings Security Division. And here, he pulled up another screen. A voicemail from 3 days ago, audio file. He played it on speaker. The voice was cultured, educated, with the smooth confidence of someone used to being obeyed. The witness is a problem that needs to be resolved permanently. I don't care how you do it, but it needs to look like an accident or random violence. Nothing that traces back. You're being paid enough to handle this cleanly. Senator Richard Calloway's voice. Sarah had heard it in news conferences and congressional hearings. There was no mistaking it. The room erupted. Hoffman was already on his phone with a federal judge requesting emergency warrants. Valdez contacted Army leadership. Hayes coordinated with FBI tactical teams. Sarah just stood there, listening to the recording play again. A senator ordering murder with the same casual tone someone might use to arrange a dinner reservation. We have him, Hoffman said, hanging up. Federal judge issued arrest warrants for Senator Calloway and 12 executives at Meridian Holdings. FBI is executing warrants right now. Valdez pulled up news feeds. They showed FBI agents entering a mansion in Georgetown. More agents raiding Meridian Holdings offices in 4 different cities simultaneously. The footage had that surreal quality of watching history happen in real time. Sarah's phone rang. Unknown number. She answered. Commander Rourke. The voice was Calloway's, tight with barely controlled fury. I don't know what you think you've accomplished, but this is far from over. I have resources you can't imagine. I have connections that will make your life a living nightmare. You sent men to kill me, Sarah said quietly. 3 of them died. The 4th gave you up. It's over. Nothing is over until I say it's over. You're a nobody nurse who got lucky one night. I'm a United States Senator with 30 years of political capital. We both know how this ends. Yeah. Sarah looked around the command center at federal agents and Army officers who'd risked their lives to protect her. We do. You're going to federal prison for murder, conspiracy, and corruption. And every soldier who died because medical supplies got stolen, every patient who suffered because medications got diverted, they're going to get justice. Maybe not today, maybe not soon, but eventually. You self-righteous... Sarah hung up. Valdez was staring at her. Was that actually him? Threatening me, on a recorded line, while under federal investigation. Sarah handed her phone to an intelligence officer. Add it to the evidence file. Hayes laughed, a harsh sound with no humor in it. He's so used to being untouchable that he can't even conceive of consequences. That recording just ended any hope of a plea deal. The news feeds updated. Senator Calloway was being led out of his Georgetown mansion in handcuffs, his face purple with rage, shouting at reporters about witch hunts and political persecution. Federal agents were carrying boxes of evidence from Meridian Holdings offices. Stock markets were already reacting, healthcare sector stocks plummeting as the scale of the corruption became clear. Sarah watched it unfold and felt nothing. Not triumph, not satisfaction, just the quiet recognition that sometimes the universe tilted toward justice, even when you'd stopped believing it was possible. Hoffman approached with documents. Commander, we're going to need extensive testimony. Grand jury proceedings, probably multiple trials. This will consume months of your life. I know. And Calloway's lawyers will tear into you. They'll question every decision you made, every action, every word. They'll try to make you the villain instead of the witness. Let them try. Sarah signed the papers he handed her. I've been called worse things than a whistleblower. Colonel Valdez's phone rang again. She answered, listened, and her expression shifted to something Sarah couldn't quite read. What? Sarah asked. That was Lieutenant General Morrison. The Army's reconsidering the Oversight Division offer. Sarah felt her stomach drop. Because I'm too controversial now. A political liability. No. Valdez smiled slightly. Because you just took down a sitting senator and exposed a $200 million theft network. Morrison thinks you're overqualified for oversight. She wants you running a new task force with full investigative authority, direct reporting to the Joint Chiefs, and authority to investigate corruption at any level of military or civilian health care. Sarah stared at her. That's not a job. That's a declaration of war against every corrupt official in the system. Exactly. Valdez handed her a folder. Which is why Morrison thinks you're perfect for it. The offer includes rank restoration to commander, full benefits, and a team you get to handpick. You'd be the most hated person in military health care and the most important. Sarah opened the folder and scanned the details. It was everything she'd wanted 2 years ago and everything she'd walked away from. A chance to fix broken systems, authority to hold people accountable, the backing to make real change instead of just documenting corruption while nothing happened. But it also meant choosing that fight every single day, making enemies of powerful people. Living with the knowledge that every investigation might end with another ambush, another team of hired killers, another night running for her life. Hayes moved beside her. For what it's worth, Commander, I think you should take it. The system needs people who won't look away. We've got enough soldiers who follow orders. What we need are soldiers who know which orders to disobey. Sarah looked around at the command center at federal agents packing up evidence, intelligence officers analyzing data, the controlled chaos of people committed to doing something that mattered. She thought about Torres and Delgado, working night shifts at Riverside and trying to do good work in a corrupt system. She thought about Marcus Reed, the veteran who almost died because an administrator decided insurance mattered more than life. She thought about Danny Liu, a medic she'd trained years ago, using those lessons to save Captain Hayes' daughter. The ripple effect. One decision spreading outward through time and space, touching lives she'd never meet. I need 24 hours to think about it, Sarah said finally. Valdez nodded. Morrison expected that. The offer's good for 72 hours. The room began to empty as operations wrapped up. Federal agents headed out to process the prisoner and coordinate with FBI teams making arrests across 6 states. Intelligence officers secured classified materials. The VA hospital slowly returned to normal operations, evacuated patients moving back to their wards. Sarah stood alone in the command center, still wearing her blood-smeared dress uniform, and tried to imagine what came next. Her phone buzzed. Torres. "Sarah, holy hell, you're all over the news. They're saying you took down a senator. Is that real?" "Yeah, it's real." "Jesus." Torres was quiet for a moment. "Listen, I did what you asked. Got the letters from your storage unit and dropped them at your sister's address. The woman who answered, she said to tell you that you're an idiot for thinking she needed a goodbye letter. Her words, not mine." Sarah felt something tight in her chest loosen. "Thanks. So what happens now? Are you coming back to Ashmont?" Sarah looked at the folder Valdez had given her. Task Force Commander. Authority to investigate anywhere, anyone, a target on her back for the rest of her career. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "I'll let you know when I figure it out." After hanging up, Sarah walked through the quiet VA hospital corridors, past the emergency department where she'd volunteered months ago, past the pharmacy where she'd noticed inventory discrepancies nobody wanted to investigate, past the memorial wall with photos of veterans who'd died in service. She stopped in front of the wall and studied the faces. Young and old, from wars spanning decades, all of them gone now. How many had died because medical supplies got stolen? How many suffered longer than necessary because medications got diverted for profit? She'd never know the exact number, but she knew it was too many. Her phone rang again. This time it was a number she recognized, Army Medical Command Headquarters. "Commander Rourke." Lieutenant General Morrison's voice was crisp, professional. "I assume Colonel Valdez delivered my offer." "Yes, ma'am." "And?" Sarah looked at the memorial wall one more time, at all those faces of people who'd given everything for something they believed mattered. "I haven't decided yet." "Then let me make the decision easier." Morrison's tone softened fractionally. 6 hours ago, we received reports from 17 different military hospitals across the country. Staff members coming forward about supply irregularities they'd noticed but were afraid to report. They saw what you did, how you refused to stay quiet even when it cost you everything, and they decided to speak up too. Sarah closed her eyes. "You've already started the change, Commander. The question is whether you're willing to see it through. Because those 17 hospitals? That's just the beginning. There are hundreds more where corruption is hiding in plain sight, protected by people who benefit from the status quo. And you think one task force can fix that? No. I think one commander who refuses to back down can start a cascade that eventually does." Morrison paused. "The Army failed you 2 years ago. Let us make it right." The call ended. Sarah stood in the empty hallway and felt the weight of the choice pressing down on her shoulders. She could walk away, take her testimony, help convict Senator Calloway and his network, then disappear back into civilian life. Find another hospital, another night shift, another attempt at invisibility. Or she could put the uniform back on and choose to fight that battle every day until it was finished, or she was. Behind her, doors opened. Footsteps approached. Sarah turned to find Captain Hayes, Colonel Valdez, and Agent Hoffman standing together. "We were taking bets on whether you'd run," Hayes said. "I had $50 saying you'd stay." "I haven't decided yet." "Yes, you have," Valdez smiled. "You decided the moment you challenged Vincent Cross about that veteran. Maybe even before that. You just needed to remember who you were." Sarah looked at the three of them, people who'd risked their careers and their lives because they believed corruption was worth fighting even when the odds were impossible. "If I take this job," she said slowly, "I'm going to make enemies. Powerful people who will do everything they can to stop me." "Already aware of that," Hoffman said. "Which is why I've been assigned as permanent legal counsel to your task force. Apparently taking down a senator makes me either very brave or very stupid. Morrison's betting on brave. And I'm transferring to your team as tactical liaison," Hayes added. "Someone needs to keep you from getting killed in the field." Valdez crossed her arms. "I'm your direct supervisor, which means I get blamed when you inevitably start investigating people with more stars on their shoulders than sense in their heads. We're all committed to this, Commander. The question is whether you are." Sarah felt something shifting in her chest. Not just acceptance, recognition. She'd been running from this fight for 2 years, trying to convince herself that walking away was the same as surviving. But surviving wasn't living, and staying quiet wasn't peace. It was just a different kind of dying. "All right," Sarah said. "I'm in." The relief on their faces was almost comical. "Good." Valdez handed her another folder, thicker than the first. "Because your first assignment starts tomorrow morning. There's a military hospital in Texas where staff members are reporting supply chain irregularities similar to what you found at Riverside. We need someone to investigate before it becomes another Callaway situation." Sarah took the folder and scanned the details. Supply theft, falsified records, administrative cover-ups, the same pattern repeated across different faces and places. Her phone buzzed with an alert. Breaking news, federal raids on Meridian Holdings locations across the country, asset seizures estimated at over $400 million. Senator Callaway formally charged with conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, and fraud. Then a second alert. Stocks in healthcare companies with histories of regulatory violations were plummeting as investors panicked about exposure to similar corruption. The ripple effect. One investigation spreading outward, touching systems and organizations that thought they were safely hidden. "Commander?" Valdez's voice pulled Sarah back to the present. "You all right?" Sarah looked at the folder in her hands. Texas. A new investigation. More corruption to expose, more fights to survive, more powerful people who'd want her eliminated, but also more lives saved. More justice served. More people like Marcus Reed getting the treatment they'd earned instead of being turned away because administrators cared more about profit than honor. "Yeah," Sarah said. "I'm all right." She walked out of the VA hospital into a night that smelled like rain and exhaust and the complicated mess of a city trying to heal itself. Federal agents were still processing the scene. News crews were packing up equipment. Somewhere in federal custody, Senator Callaway was learning what accountability felt like for the first time in his privileged life. Sarah got into an unmarked car driven by a federal agent she didn't know. The safe house was 40 minutes away, a nondescript building where she'd spend the night under armed guard while investigations continued. But first, she had one more call to make. Her sister answered on the third ring. "About damn time. You think you can send goodbye letters and then not call for 3 days?" "I'm sorry. Things got complicated." "Complicated?" Her sister's voice climbed. "Complicated is forgetting to water your plants. You took down a senator and almost got killed by assassins. That's not complicated, that's insane." Sarah smiled despite everything. "Fair point. Mom's going to have a heart attack when she sees the news. I'm warning you now." "Tell her I'm fine. Tell her—" Sarah paused, trying to find words that wouldn't sound completely hollow. "Tell her I'm doing something that matters." Her sister was quiet for a long moment, then softly. "I know. I saw your interview from 2 years ago, the one where you testified about the supply theft. I know why you left." Sarah felt her throat tighten. "I'm going back in." "I know that too, because you're an idiot who can't walk away from a fight even when it would save your life." Her sister's voice cracked slightly. "But I'm proud of you. For what it's worth, I'm really, really proud." The car pulled up to the safe house. Federal agents were already securing the perimeter, checking sight lines, establishing protocols. "I have to go," Sarah said. "Stay alive, okay? That's not a request. I'll do my best." The safe house was Spartan. Bare walls, basic furniture, reinforced doors. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed and finally let herself feel the exhaustion that had been building since the convoy ambush. She'd gone from invisible night shift nurse to the center of a federal investigation that was still spreading across healthcare systems nationwide. She'd accepted a position that made her a permanent target for anyone profiting from corruption. She'd chosen to fight a battle that might never fully end. And somehow, despite everything, she felt more like herself than she had in 2 years. Sarah pulled out her phone and opened the news alerts. Senator Callaway's arrest was the lead story on every network. Federal prosecutors were already hinting at additional charges. Meridian Holdings' board of directors was in emergency session, scrambling to distance themselves from their majority shareholder. Then a new alert appeared. Breaking. Vincent Cross found dead in federal custody. Authorities investigating possible suicide. Sarah's blood went cold. She called Valdez immediately. "Did you see—" "Already on it. Initial reports say he hung himself with torn bed sheets, but federal investigators aren't buying it. Someone got to him." Inside the detention facility? That's what we're trying to figure out. Valdez's voice was grim. Commander, this means there are more players involved than we realized, people with reach into federal detention centers. Calloway's network went deeper than we thought. Sarah felt the safe house walls closing in. Vincent Cross was the key witness who'd provided testimony connecting the pharmaceutical theft to Meridian Holdings. With him dead, half the evidence chain just evaporated. They're cleaning house, she said quietly, eliminating anyone who can connect the dots. Which makes you the most valuable witness left alive. Valdez paused. Commander, I'm doubling your security detail. Nobody gets close to you without going through a full background check first. After hanging up, Sarah sat in the darkness and listened to footsteps outside her door. Federal agents on patrol. Armed security that was supposed to make her feel safe, but just reminded her how many people wanted her dead. Her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Vincent Cross knew too much. So do you. Calloway was just the beginning. Walk away while you still can. Sarah stared at the message. No name, no signature, just a threat delivered with the casual confidence of someone who'd already killed multiple people and expected her to be next. She typed a response. I'm not walking away. And I'm not dying. Come find me if you want. I'll be ready. She hit send and turned off her phone. Outside, rain began to fall. The rain hammered against the safe house windows like bullets hitting glass. Sarah sat in darkness listening to water drum the roof and federal agents moving through hallways beyond her locked door. Her phone stayed off. The threat message still glowed in her memory even though the screen was black. She didn't sleep. Couldn't. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Vincent Cross hanging in a federal detention cell, murdered and staged as suicide because he knew too much. She saw the 3 attackers bleeding out in the VA hospital sub-basement. She saw Senator Calloway's face twisted with rage as FBI agents dragged him from his Georgetown mansion. And behind all of it, she felt something larger moving in the shadows. Someone with enough power to reach into federal custody and eliminate witnesses. Someone who viewed human lives as obstacles to be removed. At dawn, Colonel Valdez arrived with coffee and grim news. Autopsy confirms Vincent Cross was murdered. Ligature marks don't match the bedsheet positioning. Someone strangled him first, then staged the hanging. Valdez set the coffee on the small table. Federal investigators are reviewing security footage, but 3 cameras mysteriously malfunctioned during the time window. Inside job. Sarah took the coffee without tasting it. Who had access? That's the problem. Detention facilities use contractors for everything from food service to medical care. We're running background checks on 200 employees, but whoever orchestrated this knew how to hide in plain sight. Like they knew how to access VA hospital tunnel systems. Exactly. Valdez sat across from her. Commander, we're not just fighting corruption anymore. We're fighting an organization with resources and reach that rivals federal law enforcement. They've got people embedded everywhere. Sarah finally drank the coffee. It was terrible, but hot. What about Calloway? Is he talking? Lawyered up immediately. Refuses to say anything without immunity deals his attorneys know will never offer. Valdez pulled out a tablet. But his phone records are a goldmine, encrypted messages to 12 different numbers, all burner phones, all purchased with cash from various locations across 6 states. We're tracking them now. Any matches to the prisoner from the VA ambush? One, which confirms Calloway personally ordered the hit on you. That recording combined with the phone records gives us conspiracy to commit murder with ironclad evidence. Valdez smiled without humor. His lawyers are already trying to negotiate, but Assistant U.S. Attorney Hoffman says absolutely not. Calloway's going to trial, and he's going to lose. Sarah set down the coffee. That doesn't stop whoever killed Vincent Cross. Calloway's in custody, and someone still reached in and eliminated a federal witness. That kind of power doesn't disappear just because we arrested one senator, which is why Army intelligence is digging deeper. Valdez swiped through screens on her tablet. Meridian Holdings was Calloway's primary asset, but not his only one. He had investments in defense contractors, pharmaceutical companies, and private security firms. We're mapping the whole network now. A knock on the door made both women turn. Captain Hayes entered carrying a laptop and wearing an expression that said he'd been up all night. You need to see this. He set the laptop on the table and pulled up financial records. Meridian Holdings' board of directors held an emergency meeting 6 hours ago. They voted unanimously to cooperate with federal investigators in exchange for corporate immunity. Every executive is giving testimony. Sarah leaned forward. About what? Everything. The pharmaceutical theft network, the supply diversion schemes, but more importantly, Hayes zoomed in on a section of text. They're testifying that Senator Calloway wasn't the top of the pyramid. He reported to someone else, someone they only knew by a code name, Architect. The room went cold. Valdez grabbed the laptop. Do we have any idea who Architect is? Not yet. But Meridian executives say this person controlled operations across multiple states, coordinated with international trafficking networks, and had authority to order eliminations when witnesses became problems. Hayes pulled up another document. Vincent Cross wasn't the first. In the last 3 years, 7 people connected to the pharmaceutical theft investigation died under suspicious circumstances. Car accidents, house fires, apparent suicides, all ruled accidental or self-inflicted, all conveniently eliminating witnesses before they could testify. Sarah felt ice spreading through her veins. 7 murders. 7 people who'd tried to expose corruption and paid with their lives. She could have been number 8. FBI is reopening investigations into all 7 deaths, Valdez said. If we can prove they were murders orchestrated by Architect, we've got a serial killing charge on top of everything else. Sarah stood and moved to the window. Rain had stopped, but clouds still hung low and heavy over the city. Somewhere out there, a person called Architect was watching federal investigations close in and deciding who needed to die next to protect their empire. They sent me a message last night, Sarah said quietly. Anonymous number. Said Vincent Cross knew too much, and so do I. Told me to walk away while I still could. Valdez and Hayes exchanged looks. You didn't think to mention this earlier? Valdez's voice climbed. I was processing it. Sarah turned from the window. But here's what I don't understand. If Architect wanted me dead, why send a warning? They've killed 7 people already. Why not just make me number 8? Hayes frowned. Because you're too visible now. You took down a senator in front of national media. If you die under suspicious circumstances, it becomes a federal investigation with unlimited resources. Architect stays hidden by making deaths look accidental. Your death would be too obvious. So instead they're trying to scare me into silence, which means they're worried. Valdez was typing rapidly on her tablet. They're losing control of the situation. Calloway's arrest exposed connections they'd kept buried for years. The Meridian executives flipping means more exposure. They're panicking. Sarah felt a strategy forming. Then we make them panic more. Force them into mistakes. People who feel in control don't murder witnesses in federal custody. People who are desperate do. You want to bait them. Hayes shook his head. Commander, that's insane. These people have already tried to kill you twice. And failed both times. Sarah met his eyes. But they succeeded in killing Vincent Cross because he was vulnerable and isolated. I'm not. I've got federal protection, army backing, and national media attention. I'm the worst possible target for someone trying to stay hidden. Valdez was staring at her. What exactly are you proposing? I take the Texas assignment, investigate the hospital corruption publicly, make it clear I'm not backing down and I'm not going away. Architect either has to let the investigation continue or come after me directly. Either way, we get what we need. If they come after you directly, you die, Hayes said flatly. Not if we're ready for them. Sarah pulled up maps on the laptop. The Texas hospital is outside Fort Lawson, a major military installation. Plenty of security, controlled access, defensible positions. If Architect sends another hit team, we'll be waiting. Valdez stood and paced the small room. Morrison will never approve this. It's using you as bait in a trap that might not work. Then don't tell Morrison it's a trap. Tell her I'm beginning my investigation into corruption at military healthcare facilities, starting with the most urgent case, which happens to be true. Hayes looked at Valdez. She's got a point. We need Architect to make a move or we'll spend years chasing a ghost. And Commander Rourke is right about visibility being protection. The more public her investigation, the harder it is for Architect to eliminate her quietly. Valdez stopped pacing. You understand if this goes wrong? You're dead, and we've lost our most important witness. If we do nothing, Architect keeps killing people and stays hidden forever. 7 deaths already. How many more before we stop them? Sarah's voice was steady. I didn't survive 2 assassination attempts just to hide in safe houses for the rest of my career. After a long moment, Valdez nodded. All right, we'll pitch it to Morrison, but you follow security protocols exactly. No improvisation, no heroics. Understood. 2 hours later, Sarah sat in a video conference with Lieutenant General Morrison, Assistant U.S. Attorney Hoffman, and the FBI Director. She laid out her proposal while they listened with expressions ranging from skepticism to outright horror. When she finished, Morrison was the first to speak. Commander, what you're describing is essentially painting a target on your back and waiting for someone to shoot at it. With respect, ma'am, I already have a target on my back. The question is whether we use that strategically or pretend I'm safe hiding in secure facilities. The FBI Director leaned forward. The Bureau has significant concerns about using witnesses as operational bait. If something goes wrong, I die doing work that matters instead of waiting for Architect to eventually find a way past security. Sarah kept her voice level. 7 people are already dead. How many more before we acknowledge that playing defense isn't working? Hoffman adjusted his glasses. From a prosecutorial standpoint, Commander Rourke's visibility actually strengthens our case. If Architect attempts another elimination, we gain additional charges and evidence of ongoing criminal conspiracy. If they don't attempt elimination, the investigation proceeds and we gather testimony from Texas that builds the larger pattern. Morrison drummed her fingers on the desk. You're asking me to approve an operation where success means either you survive another assassination attempt or you conduct your investigation without being attacked. Those aren't great odds. They're the only odds we have, ma'am. The video conference went silent for nearly a minute. Sarah could see Morrison calculating risks and benefits, weighing the value of one commander against the possibility of breaking open an investigation that had already consumed multiple lives. Finally, Morrison spoke. Approved, but with conditions. You travel with a full security detail. You stay on Fort Lawson grounds except for official business. You wear protective equipment at all times in unsecured areas. And if intelligence identifies a credible threat, you evacuate immediately without argument. Yes, ma'am. And Commander? Morrison's expression softened fractionally. Don't get killed. That's not a suggestion. The conference ended. Sarah sat back and felt adrenaline mixing with exhaustion in her bloodstream. She just volunteered to walk into a situation where professional killers might be waiting. The smart move would have been accepting witness protection and disappearing until trials concluded. But she tried disappearing for 2 years and it hadn't worked. Invisibility wasn't safety. It was just a slower kind of dying. That afternoon, Sarah flew to Texas on a military transport surrounded by 8 federal agents and enough firepower to invade a small country. Hayes accompanied her, checking sightlines and exit routes compulsively. Valdez stayed in Washington, coordinating with Army intelligence and FBI investigators tracking Architect's network. Fort Lawson sprawled across 10,000 acres of scrubland outside San Antonio. The military hospital sat near the center of the base, a modern facility that treated active duty personnel, veterans, and their families. From the outside, it looked pristine and well-maintained. Inside, according to staff reports, supplies were disappearing faster than inventory records could explain. Sarah's security detail established a perimeter around the hospital administrative wing before she even entered the building. Military police cleared hallways. Agents checked every office, every closet, every space where a threat could hide. The hospital director was a colonel named Martin Reeves, 53 years old, with a spotless service record and an expression that said he deeply resented federal oversight invading his territory. Commander Rourke. He didn't offer his hand. I'm told you're here to investigate allegations of supply irregularities. That's correct, Colonel. And I'm told I'm required to provide full access to all records, personnel files, and inventory systems. His jaw tightened. I want you to know I consider this investigation a waste of resources and an insult to my staff's integrity. Sarah met his eyes calmly. Then you have nothing to worry about. If your operation is clean, my investigation will confirm that and everyone moves on. And if you find discrepancies, what then? Then we determine whether they're honest mistakes or evidence of systematic theft. Same as any audit. She gestured toward his office. Shall we begin? Reeves led her inside reluctantly. His office was decorated with unit citations and photos from various deployments. A man proud of his service, protective of his command. Exactly the kind of officer who would either cooperate completely or obstruct every step depending on what the investigation uncovered. Sarah pulled up inventory records on her laptop while Hayes positioned himself near the door. The numbers told a familiar story. Morphine requisitions that didn't match usage logs, trauma supplies ordered in quantities that exceeded reasonable demand, medications disappearing from secure storage without proper documentation. Colonel, can you explain why this hospital ordered 600 units of fentanyl last month when patient treatment logs show only 400 administered? Reeves leaned over her shoulder, frowning. That can't be right. Let me see the sourcing. He scrolled through screens. Those orders were placed by the pharmacy director, Captain Lloyd Shaw. He handles all controlled substance requisitions. I'd like to speak with Captain Shaw. He's on duty now. I'll have him brought to my office. Reeves made a phone call. 10 minutes later, a man in his 40s entered looking nervous. Captain Lloyd Shaw had the soft build of someone who spent more time behind desks than in the field. His eyes darted between Sarah and Reeves like he was calculating escape routes. Captain Shaw, Sarah gestured to a chair. I'm reviewing controlled substance orders, and I have questions about discrepancies between requisitions and usage. Shaw sat slowly. What kind of discrepancies? The kind where your hospital orders significantly more medication than patient records indicate you're administering, where supplies go missing from secure storage without proper documentation, where inventory numbers don't reconcile with purchasing records. Sarah slid the laptop toward him. Can you explain these numbers? Shaw stared at the screen. Sweat appeared on his forehead despite the office air conditioning. I follow standard protocols for all orders. If there are discrepancies, they're probably data entry errors or... Captain Shaw. Sarah's voice dropped lower. I've investigated this kind of theft before. I know what it looks like. And I know the difference between honest mistakes and systematic diversion. So I'm going to ask you again. Can you explain these numbers? Shaw's hands were shaking now. He looked at Reeves, then back to Sarah, then at the door where Hayes stood blocking the exit. I want a lawyer, Shaw whispered. Reeves exploded. What the hell are you talking about? You're saying these allegations are true? I'm saying I want a lawyer before I answer any more questions. Shaw's voice was getting higher, panic taking over. I know my rights. I don't have to. You're damn right you don't have to. Reeves grabbed his phone. But you're relieved of duty effective immediately pending investigation. Get out of my office. Shaw practically ran from the room. Hayes stopped him at the door long enough for federal agents to take custody, then let him go. Reeves sat down heavily. How bad is it? Sarah pulled up more records. Based on preliminary review, at least $200,000 in diverted medications over the last 18 months. Possibly more if we dig deeper into historical records. The pattern matches what we found at Riverside General and at 11 other facilities connected to the Meridian Holdings network. Son of a bitch! Reeves looked genuinely shocked. Shaw's been my pharmacy director for 3 years. Never a single red flag. That's how these operations work, Colonel. They recruit people who appear trustworthy and competent. People nobody would suspect. Sarah closed the laptop. I'll need to interview your entire supply chain staff. Someone else had to be involved. Shaw couldn't have done this alone. The investigation consumed the next 3 days. Sarah worked 18-hour shifts reviewing records, interviewing staff, and building a comprehensive picture of how Fort Lawson's supply theft operation functioned. Hayes and the security detail shadowed her constantly, checking every room before she entered, screening everyone who came within speaking distance. By the 3rd day, the pattern was clear. Captain Shaw had diverted controlled substances to a private distributor who then sold them on the black market. But Shaw was just the on-site operator. Someone else provided instructions, arranged logistics, and collected profits. Someone who'd used identical systems at Riverside General and 15 other hospitals across the country. Sarah was reviewing financial records when Valdez called with news that made everything click into place. Army intelligence cracked one of the burner phone accounts connected to Senator Calloway. Valdez sounded exhausted but triumphant. Messages between Calloway and Architect discussing the Fort Lawson operation specifically. They referenced the pharmacist and Texas distribution channels. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. Do we have Architect's real identity? Not yet, but we're close. The burner phone connected to a server in Maryland. FBI raided the location 2 hours ago and seized hard drives. Forensics is processing them now. What about Shaw? Has he talked? Lawyered up like Cross did, but his attorney's making noise about cooperation if we offer immunity. Hoffman's considering it. Shaw's testimony could connect Fort Lawson directly to the larger network. Sarah looked at the records spread across her temporary office. Names and numbers and transactions that represented stolen medicine and suffering patients. The same crime repeated across institutions because the system allowed it. Tell Hoffman to offer the deal. We need Shaw's testimony more than we need him in prison. But make it conditional. Full cooperation, complete disclosure, or the deal voids and he faces maximum charges. Already done. Shaw's attorney agreed. He's being transported to federal custody for debriefing tomorrow morning. After hanging up, Sarah allowed herself a moment of something that might have been hope. They were closing in. Vincent Cross's death had been meant to scare witnesses into silence, but instead it had accelerated investigations and pushed more people toward cooperation. Architect's organization was unraveling. Her phone buzzed with another anonymous message. You're making a mistake. Walk away now, or what happened to Cross happens to Shaw, and then to you. Sarah stared at the threat. Architect was watching, knew about Shaw's cooperation deal, knew she was at Fort Lawson conducting the investigation. She forwarded the message to Valdez with a simple note. They're watching. Increase Shaw's security. 20 minutes later, her phone rang. Valdez sounded shaken. Shaw's dead. His attorney found him in the interview room with a slit throat. Federal agents were outside the entire time. Nobody saw anyone enter or leave. Sarah felt the world tilt. Another murder. Another witness eliminated before testimony could damage Architect's network. This was beyond inside help or lucky timing. This was an organization with tendrils so deep into federal law enforcement that they could execute people in secured facilities without being caught. How? Sarah's voice came out hoarse. We don't know yet. But Commander, you need to understand what this means. Architect can reach anyone, anywhere, anytime. The only reason you're still alive is because killing you would generate too much attention. But if you keep pushing, eventually that calculation changes. Sarah looked around her temporary office at Fort Lawson. Federal agents outside the door. Military police on patrol. Multiple layers of security that were supposed to keep her safe. None of it mattered if Architect had people embedded at every level. What do you want me to do? Sarah asked. Run? Hide? Watch more people die because I'm too scared to keep investigating? I want you to be realistic about the threat. Valdez's voice was strained. 8 people dead now. 8. And we still don't know who Architect is or how to stop them. Then we force them out of hiding. Sarah felt cold clarity settling over her. They keep killing witnesses because they're afraid of testimony. What if I testified publicly? Gave interviews, published findings, made everything I know available to media outlets nationwide. Architect can't kill information that's already been disseminated. Valdez was quiet for a long moment. That's actually not a terrible idea. If your testimony is public record, eliminating you accomplishes nothing. The damage is already done. Exactly. And it pressures Architect into making defensive moves instead of offensive ones. They'll have to focus on protecting their identity rather than eliminating witnesses. I'll run it past Morrison and Hoffman. But Sarah? Valdez's voice softened. Be careful. These people have killed 8 times without getting caught. Don't assume you'll be the one who survives if they decide you're too dangerous to leave alive. That night, Sarah sat in her quarters at Fort Lawson, writing testimony that would expose everything she'd discovered. The pharmaceutical theft network, the murdered witnesses, the connections between Riverside General, Fort Lawson, and 14 other facilities. She wrote it in clear, simple language that juries could understand and journalists could report. When she finished, it was 40 pages of documentation that would destroy careers and topple institutions. She encrypted the file and sent copies to Valdez, Hoffman, Morrison, and 3 major news organizations with instructions to publish if anything happened to her. Then she waited. Dawn came without incident. Sarah showered, dressed in her uniform, and met Hayes for breakfast in the officers' mess. Around them, military personnel ate and talked and laughed, unaware that somewhere in this building or this base, Architect might have agents watching. You look calm, Hayes observed. I'd be terrified. I am terrified. I'm just not letting it stop me. Sarah drank coffee that tasted like burnt rubber. Fear makes you careful, but if you let it make you paralyzed, you've already lost. Hayes's phone buzzed. He checked it, and his expression went from concerned to shocked. They got him. FBI forensics identified Architect from the seized hard drives. Sarah set down her coffee cup carefully. Who? Deputy Director Ronald Garrett, FBI Internal Affairs Division. He's been investigating corruption allegations against other agents for 12 years. Hayes showed her the report, which gave him access to witness lists, testimony schedules, federal detention facility protocols, everything he needed to coordinate eliminations and make them look like accidents or suicides. Sarah felt her stomach drop. An FBI deputy director. Someone with authority over the very investigations meant to expose him. No wonder Architect had stayed hidden so long. He'd been protecting himself from the inside, redirecting resources, burying evidence, eliminating anyone who got too close. Where is he now? In custody. FBI arrested him 2 hours ago based on evidence from the hard drives. Phone records, encrypted messages, financial transfers to offshore accounts. They've got him cold. Hayes scrolled through more information. Senator Callaway has already flipped. He's giving testimony about Garrett in exchange for reduced charges. Says Garrett orchestrated the entire pharmaceutical network and used his FBI position to protect operations. Sarah stood. I need to see Valdez immediately. They rushed to the secure communications room where Valdez was on video conference with Morrison and Hoffman. When Sarah entered, all three looked at her with expressions that combined relief and exhaustion. It's over, Morrison said. Deputy Director Garrett is in custody. Senator Callaway is cooperating. Meridian Holdings executives are providing testimony. The entire network is collapsing. 8 people died, Sarah said quietly. 8 people who tried to expose corruption and got murdered for it. 9 if you count Vincent Cross. Hoffman's voice was grim. But because of their testimony and your investigation, we're dismantling a criminal organization that's been operating for over a decade. Garrett, Callaway, and 47 other defendants are facing federal charges. The pharmaceutical theft network is destroyed. Sarah sat down slowly. Over. After 2 years of hiding, 3 days of terror, and 8 murders, it was actually over. Architect had a name and a face and was sitting in federal custody where he couldn't hurt anyone else. But she couldn't feel relief, just emptiness where fear had been living for so long. What happens now? She asked. Morrison leaned forward. Now you testify at trials. Help prosecute everyone involved, and then you take command of the oversight task force we discussed. Hunt down every other corrupt official profiting from theft in military healthcare systems. There will be more Garretts, Valdez added. More people with power using it to protect criminal enterprises. Your job is finding them before they kill 8 people. Sarah nodded slowly. This was the mission, the work that mattered. Not just exposing one network, but rebuilding systems so corruption couldn't flourish in darkness. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Commander Rourke. The voice was unfamiliar, male, with an accent she couldn't place. You've been very busy this week. Impressive work taking down Garrett and Callaway. Sarah's blood went cold. She gestured frantically to Valdez, who immediately started tracing the call. Who is this? Someone who appreciates competence. Garrett was sloppy. He let personal greed compromise operational security. That's why he got caught. A pause. You think he was Architect? He was just a regional director. There are 6 others like him, and someone above them all. Sarah felt the floor drop away beneath her. You're lying. Am I? Check Garrett's financial records more carefully. He received payments, but he also made payments upstream to accounts in the Cayman Islands, Switzerland, and Singapore, accounts we control. Valdez was typing frantically, pulling up financial records on her screen. Her face went pale. Why are you telling me this? Sarah asked. Because you're useful. You exposed Garrett, which means we don't have to eliminate him ourselves. Loose ends are dangerous. The voice carried a hint of amusement. You're good at finding corruption, Commander. Keep doing it. Clean up our mistakes. Make the system more efficient for us. I'm not working for you. You already are. Every corrupt official you expose makes our operation stronger. Every weak link you remove makes us harder to detect. You think you're fighting us? The voice laughed softly. You're doing exactly what we want. The call ended. Sarah stared at her phone while Valdez and Morrison and Hoffman looked at her with expressions of mounting horror. "Tell me that wasn't real," Morrison said finally. Valdez pulled up the financial records on her screen. Garrett received $40 million over 10 years, but he also transferred $18 million upstream to 3 different offshore accounts. The transactions are carefully hidden, but they're there. Meaning Garrett was middle management in an organization we haven't even begun to expose. Hoffman looked sick. Callaway. The Meridian executives, all 47 defendants. They're just one branch of something much larger. Sarah felt exhaustion crushing down on her shoulders. They'd won the battle and discovered they were losing the war. Garrett's arrest hadn't stopped anything. It had just exposed how little they actually understood about the organization they were fighting. Outside Fort Lawson, morning sun was burning through clouds. Staff moved between buildings carrying out daily routines. Everything looked normal, but nothing was normal anymore. Sarah's phone buzzed with a message from the unknown number. "Welcome to the real fight, Commander. Try not to die too quickly." Sarah set the phone down and looked at the faces on the video conference screen. Morrison, Valdez, Hoffman, all of them processing the same crushing realization that their victory had been an illusion. "So what do we do?" Morrison's voice was flat. "Pretend we didn't just learn that everything we've accomplished is meaningless?" "No." Sarah stood and moved to the window overlooking Fort Lawson. Soldiers were running morning drills in the distance, their formation perfect against the Texas dawn. "We do exactly what they don't expect. We accept it." Hoffman frowned. "Accept what?" "That corruption this deep can't be eliminated in one investigation. That there will always be people profiting from suffering. That we can't win every battle." Sarah turned back to the screen. "But we can win enough battles that the system starts fixing itself. We can make corruption expensive and dangerous instead of safe and profitable. We can train people to recognize it and report it without fear." "They just told you that you're doing their work for them," Valdez said, "that every corrupt official you expose makes their operation stronger." "They're lying." Sarah's voice was certain now. "If we were really helping them, they wouldn't have tried to kill me twice. They wouldn't have murdered 8 people to protect their network. Fear makes people say things designed to break your will, but I'm not broken." Morrison studied her through the screen. "What are you proposing, Commander?" "I take command of the Oversight Task Force, like we discussed, but instead of just investigating individual cases, we build something bigger. A system where corruption can't hide. Whistleblower protections that actually work. Independent review boards with real authority. Training programs that teach medical staff how to identify theft and who to report it to safely." Sarah pulled up documents on her laptop. Garrett and his organization profit from darkness and silence. "We flood the system with light." Hoffman was nodding slowly. "Change the culture. Make corruption socially and professionally unacceptable." "Exactly. It won't happen overnight. But 10 years from now, 15 years from now, the system will be different because we started making it different today." Morrison leaned back in her chair. "That's a long war, Commander. You prepared to fight it?" Sarah thought about Marcus Reed gasping for breath in the Riverside waiting room because Vincent Cross decided insurance mattered more than life. She thought about soldiers dying overseas because medical supplies got diverted for profit. She thought about 8 dead witnesses who'd tried to expose corruption and paid with everything. "Yeah," Sarah said, "I'm prepared." The video conference ended with Morrison authorizing the expanded task force. Sarah would have 50 agents, full investigative authority, and direct reporting to the Joint Chiefs. She'd also have enemies at every level who viewed oversight as threat to their comfortable arrangements. But she'd had enemies before, and she was still standing. Over the next 6 months, Sarah built the task force from the ground up. She recruited investigators from military police, FBI, and healthcare administration, people who understood both medical systems and criminal operations. She established whistleblower protocols that protected reporters from retaliation. She created training programs that taught staff how to spot supply theft, falsified records, and administrative cover-ups. And she investigated, relentlessly, 3 hospitals in North Carolina, a medical supply company in Ohio, a Veterans Affairs facility in California where administrators had been skimming disability payments for 5 years. Each investigation led to arrests, prosecutions, and system reforms that made the next theft harder to execute. The media called her the Ghost Commander, the woman who'd walked away from military service and returned to dismantle corruption from the inside. News profiles detailed her story. The combat rescue officer who'd exposed supply theft, resigned in protest, and ended up taking down a senator and an FBI deputy director. Sarah hated the attention but understood its value. Every article made the next whistleblower braver. Every interview showed staff that reporting corruption didn't have to be a death sentence. Senator Calloway's trial began in October. Sarah testified for 3 days, walking the jury through the pharmaceutical theft network, the murdered witnesses, the phone calls ordering her elimination. Calloway's lawyers tried to paint her as vindictive and unstable, someone with a grudge against authority. The jury didn't buy it, guilty on all counts: conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, fraud, obstruction of justice. 45 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. Deputy Director Garrett went to trial in January. Sarah testified again, this time explaining how an FBI official had used his position to coordinate 8 murders while protecting criminal operations. The evidence was overwhelming: financial records, encrypted messages, testimony from former associates who'd flipped to save themselves. Guilty. Life imprisonment without parole. 43 other defendants pleaded guilty rather than face trials. Meridian Holdings was dissolved, its assets seized and liquidated to compensate victims. The pharmaceutical network that had operated for over a decade ceased to exist. But Sarah knew the larger organization remained. The voice on the phone had been right about one thing: Garrett and Calloway were just regional directors in something much bigger. The offshore accounts proved it. The careful compartmentalization proved it. Somewhere, someone was watching her work and adjusting their operations to stay hidden. Sarah chose to view that as job security. In March, she returned to Ashmont City for the first time since the convoy ambush. Riverside General had been restructured under new leadership after Vincent Cross's arrest. The hospital board requested Sarah attend a dedication ceremony for something they wanted to show her. She arrived with minimal security, just Hayes and 2 agents, and found the main entrance crowded with staff, patients, and media. Torres spotted her first. He'd been promoted to senior resident and wore the slightly terrified expression of someone realizing they were now responsible for other people's lives. "Sarah, you came. You said it was important." She looked around at the crowd. "What's going on?" Delgado appeared through the press of people. "We wanted to show you something. Come on." They led her through the hospital to the emergency department, where she'd worked night shifts and tried to stay invisible. The waiting room had been renovated. New chairs, fresh paint, updated equipment. But what stopped Sarah cold was the wall. A memorial, bronze plaques with names etched into metal. 8 names. The witnesses who'd died trying to expose corruption. Vincent Cross, despite his crimes. The federal agents killed in the convoy ambush. Patients who died because medications were diverted instead of administered. And at the center, a larger plaque with text that made Sarah's throat close. In memory of those who spoke truth when silence was safer. May their courage inspire us to choose justice over comfort, transparency over convenience, and care over profit. Dedicated by the staff of Riverside General in honor of Commander Sarah Rourke, who taught us that doing the right thing matters more than doing the easy thing. Sarah couldn't speak. She just stood there staring at her name on the wall beside 8 people who'd died for exposing corruption. "We took donations from staff," Delgado said quietly. "Everyone contributed, because we want to remember that this place almost destroyed you and you saved it anyway." Torres stepped beside her. "You showed us what real leadership looks like, not the kind that protects itself first, the kind that protects everyone else." The hospital director approached, a woman named Catherine Mills who'd replaced Cross after his arrest. "Commander Rourke, this hospital failed you in every possible way. We ignored your warnings. We didn't defend you when Cross attacked you. We almost let you be escorted out while federal agents were bleeding in our parking lot." Her voice was steady but emotional. "We can't change that, but we can make sure every person who walks through these doors knows that someone fought for their right to be treated with dignity, and that someone was you." Sarah finally found her voice. "I was just doing my job." "No," Mills shook her head. "You were doing everyone else's job because they were too afraid to do it themselves. There's a difference." The crowd applauded. Sarah stood there feeling exposed and grateful and completely overwhelmed. She'd spent 2 years trying to disappear, and now there was a memorial with her name on it in a hospital she'd never expected to see again. After the ceremony, Marcus Reed approached with his sister Jennifer. The veteran looked healthy now, fully recovered from the collapsed lung that had almost killed him. "Commander," he saluted, "I never properly thanked you for saving my life." "You thanked me plenty already." "Not enough." Jennifer pulled out a folder. "We started a foundation, Veterans Medical Advocacy. We help former service members navigate healthcare systems and connect them with resources. We're naming it after you." Sarah took the folder numbly. The Rourke Foundation. Mission statement about protecting veterans' access to quality healthcare. Board of directors that included 2 former generals, a congresswoman, and Marcus Reed himself. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Marcus said. "Let us turn what almost killed me into something that helps others. Let your name mean something to veterans who need someone fighting for them." Sarah looked at these people who'd taken trauma and grief and transformed it into action. Who'd decided that the best response to corruption was building something better. "Yeah," she said finally. "Yes." That evening, Sarah sat in a hotel room in Ashmont and video called her sister for the first time in months. "You look terrible," her sister said immediately. "When's the last time you slept?" "I sleep. Lying to me doesn't work. I've known you too long." Her sister's expression softened. "But you look happy, exhausted and stressed and probably headed for a breakdown, but happy, like you're doing something that matters." Sarah smiled despite everything. "I am." "Good. Because Mom won't stop telling everyone at church that her daughter took down a senator. It's embarrassing how proud she is. Tell her I'm sorry. Tell her yourself. She wants you to visit. No excuses, no security concerns. Just come home for a weekend and let her feed you." Sarah promised she would. After hanging up, she sat alone with the lights off and thought about the last year. She'd survived 2 assassination attempts, exposed corruption that led to 47 convictions, built a task force that was changing how the military investigated healthcare fraud, and she'd finally stopped running from who she was. The uniform had never been the problem. The system had been the problem, and systems could be fixed if enough people refused to accept corruption as inevitable. Her phone buzzed with a message from Lieutenant General Morrison. "New assignment briefing tomorrow, 0800 hours. Major hospital system in Florida showing familiar patterns. Your team is wheels up at 1200. Good work this year, Commander. Keep it going." Sarah read the message and felt something that might have been purpose settling into her bones. There would always be another investigation, another corrupt official, another hospital where supplies were being diverted while patients suffered. But there would also be people like Torres and Delgado who learned from her example, whistleblowers who found courage because she'd survived speaking up, staff members who chose transparency over silence because they'd seen that standing up actually mattered, the ripple effect. One decision spreading outward through time and space, touching lives she'd never meet. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the Pentagon briefing a room full of generals about the task force's first-year results. 37 investigations completed, 23 criminal referrals, $44 million in recovered assets. More importantly, 200 staff members had come forward with corruption allegations they'd previously been too afraid to report. The system was changing, slowly, painfully, but changing. After the briefing, Morrison pulled her aside. "I'm promoting you to lieutenant commander and doubling your team's budget. You've accomplished more in 1 year than most officers manage in entire careers." "Thank you, ma'am." Morrison studied her face. "You know they're going to keep coming after you. The larger organization, the offshore accounts, they're still out there." "I know." "And you're not afraid?" Sarah thought about that question. Fear had been her constant companion for so long it felt like part of her now. Fear of assassination attempts, fear of failure, fear that speaking up would cost her everything again. But she'd learned something important. Fear was information, not instruction. It told you what mattered and what the stakes were. It didn't tell you to stop. "I'm terrified," Sarah said honestly. "But I'm more afraid of what happens if people like me don't fight. Because then corruption wins by default. Then the Vincents and Callaways and Garretts get to keep profiting while patients die. And I can't live with that." Morrison nodded slowly. "That's why I picked you for this job. Not because you're fearless, because you're afraid. and you do it anyway. 2 years after that night in Riverside General's emergency department, Sarah stood in front of a congressional committee explaining how military healthcare corruption could be prevented through systematic reform. Representatives asked questions, some hostile, some supportive, all of them aware that the woman testifying had personally taken down a senator and exposed a network that had operated for over a decade. When the hearing ended, Sarah walked out of the Capitol building into Washington sunlight. Hayes waited by the car, scanning surroundings out of habit, even though the immediate threat had passed. "How'd it go?" he asked. "Half of them think I'm a hero. The other half think I'm a troublemaker who needs to be controlled." Sarah climbed into the car. "So about what I expected." Hayes pulled into traffic. "You hear about the new whistleblower cases? 17 more people came forward after watching your testimony. They want to report corruption at facilities we haven't even investigated yet." Sarah looked out the window at the city passing by. Somewhere in this town, in buildings like the ones they were driving past, people were making the same choice she'd made 3 years ago. To speak up or stay silent. To accept corruption or fight it. To let fear control them or acknowledge fear and move forward anyway. She'd learned you couldn't eliminate corruption completely. Human nature guaranteed there would always be people willing to profit from suffering. But you could make corruption harder, more dangerous, less profitable. You could build systems that protected whistleblowers and punished thieves. You could create a culture where speaking up was celebrated instead of destroyed. And slowly, over years and decades, you could shift the balance toward justice. It wouldn't be clean. It wouldn't be quick. It wouldn't look like movie endings where the hero defeats evil and everything's solved. But it would matter. Sarah's phone buzzed with messages from her team. New investigation approved in Florida. 3 suspects identified in the California 5A case. The Rourke Foundation had just secured funding to expand to 12 more states. "Where to next?" Hayes asked. Sarah checked her schedule. Morning briefing with Morrison. Afternoon testimony prep for the Garrett appeals hearing. Evening video conference with task force investigators in 6 different states. Then wheels up tomorrow for Florida to begin the next investigation. "Back to work," she said, "because that's what you did when you chose this fight. You showed up, you investigated, you testified, you trained the next generation to recognize corruption and report it. You built something bigger than yourself that would keep working after you were gone. You turned the night you were escorted out of a hospital in disgrace into a memorial that inspired others. You transformed assassination attempts into policy changes. You took 8 murders and made them mean something by ensuring they were the last murders a criminal network committed." Sarah looked at her reflection in the car window and saw someone she barely recognized from 3 years ago. The scared nurse trying to disappear was gone. In her place was a commander who'd accepted that some battles never ended, you just fought them better. The uniform she wore carried weight now. Not just medals and ribbons, but responsibility. Every investigation she conducted, every corruption case she exposed, every whistleblower she protected, all of it accumulated into something larger than any single person. A movement, a cultural shift, a recognition that doing the right thing mattered even when it was terrifying. Her phone buzzed one more time. Torres, sending a photo from Riverside General, the memorial wall with fresh flowers placed by a patient's family. The message said simply, "Thank you for teaching us courage has a cost, and it's still worth paying." Sarah saved the photo and put her phone away. Some people would say she was naive. That corruption was too embedded, too powerful, too profitable to ever be defeated. That she was wasting her career fighting a battle she couldn't win. They were probably right about the battle, but they were wrong about the winning. Because winning wasn't about eliminating corruption completely. It was about making sure corruption paid a price. That people like Vincent Cross and Senator Callaway and Deputy Director Garrett faced consequences instead of protection. That the next Marcus Reed got treated instead of turned away. That the next witness survived instead of being murdered. Victory was measured in investigations completed and lives saved and systems reformed. In whistleblowers who spoke up because they'd seen others survive speaking up. In staff who chose transparency because they'd learned silence enabled suffering. Sarah Rourke had walked away from the military because the system was broken. She'd returned because broken things could be fixed if enough people refused to accept brokenness as permanent. And she would keep fixing it, one investigation at a time, one exposed official at a time, one protected whistleblower at a time, until either the work was finished or she was. The car turned toward the Pentagon where her team was waiting. Sarah closed her eyes briefly, took a breath, and prepared for the next fight. Because that's what commanders did. They assessed the battlefield, rallied their troops, and engaged the enemy with every resource available. And they didn't quit. No matter how long the war lasted, no matter how many battles they lost along the way, they kept fighting. Because some things were worth fighting for, even when victory wasn't guaranteed. Justice, accountability, the principle that human lives mattered more than profit margins. These things were worth everything Sarah had sacrificed and everything she might still sacrifice. And she would keep giving it, gladly, for as long as the fight continued. The Pentagon appeared ahead, sunlight reflecting off glass and steel. Sarah opened her eyes, checked her watch, and started reviewing case files for the afternoon briefing. There was work to do. There was always work to do. And she was exactly where she needed to be.